He was the richest, most feared rancher in all of Wyoming, and the loneliest man alive. Caleb Hartwell had built walls so high around his heart that not a single soul could reach him. He'd been burned once, and he swore, never again. So when his mother and a senator tried to chain him to a marriage he never wanted, he grabbed the first way out he could find. A stranger, a seamstress, a lie told in front of everyone. But here's the thing about walls. The right person doesn't need a door. They just wait until you're tired of being alone, and then they walk right through. This is a channel built for souls who love the wide-open West. Stories of weathered cowboys learning to feel again. Love that grows slow and stubborn, like prairie grass. The fierce love of mothers, and the simple, powerful truth that people need each other more than they'll ever admit. This story is for anyone who ever convinced themselves they weren't worth loving. Caleb Hartwell nearly destroyed everything beautiful in his life, trying to protect himself from being hurt. Don't let that be your story too. If this hit close to home, give it a like, leave a comment, even just your city, share it with someone rebuilding their heart right now, and subscribe. There's always another story waiting here for you.
A sharp November wind, smelling of pine and coming snow, cut right through Elena Cross's thin wool coat, while the stagecoach bounced its way toward the Hartwell ranch. She clutched the leather bag on her lap, holding on to all she had in the world. Inside were 3 needles, a spool of dark thread, her mama's old thimble, and a letter from Mrs. Adelaide Hartwell hiring her as a seamstress for the winter. It was supposed to be straightforward work, just mending clothes and maybe sewing a few new dresses. It would be enough to wire some money back home to her little sister in Denver and stop the bank from taking their family cottage. It was her one chance to prove Elena Cross was more than just the daughter of a man who'd left behind a pile of debts and a bad name. The driver reined in the horses at the head of a long gravel road. Elena looked out the dirty window and her breath caught in her throat. The Hartwell place was spread out across the land like a picture from a magazine. The main house was a grand 3-story building made of honey-colored stone that seemed to glow in the afternoon sun. Bright white paint shined on the porches that wrapped all the way around it. Big barns and stables sat behind the house, and way out on the hills, cattle looked like tiny specks of pepper. It was the kind of money and power Elena had only ever seen through a shop window. "This is it for you, miss," the driver hollered, his words turning to smoke in the frigid air. Elena climbed out, her old boots crunching on the gravel. She smoothed down her coat, pushed a stray piece of dark hair from her face, and held her head high. She had learned long ago that a little bit of confidence could cover up a lot. Even a dress with 6 patches and a stomach that hadn't seen a real meal since yesterday's stale bread. She walked up to the big front door and lifted her hand to knock, but it swung open before she even touched it. A butler stood there, his face like a closed book. Behind him the entryway was lit up like a festival, with crystal chandeliers, shiny floors that reflected the light, and the sound of music and happy chatter coming from deep inside. "Service entrance is around back," the butler said flatly, already starting to shut the door. "I'm not a delivery," Elena said, her voice coming out a little too fast. "My name is Elena Cross. Mrs. Hartwell sent for me. I'm her new seamstress." The butler's eyes traveled down her worn-out coat and muddy boots, and he stared long enough to make her cheeks burn with shame. "Mrs. Hartwell is currently occupied. We are hosting a very important function this evening. Please come back in the morning." "But my journey took 2 whole days. The letter said, 'Tomorrow,'" he repeated. And then the heavy door clicked shut. Elena was left standing all alone on the porch, the cold air stinging her lungs. The cash for a ticket home was gone, spent on a little food to get her by. She had exactly $4 left. That was not enough for a room, not enough for anything. She squeezed her eyes shut, fighting back a wave of sheer panic. That's when she heard it. A woman's voice, clear and strong, cutting right through the party noise. "Thomas, that is pure nonsense. If Mrs. Hartwell sent for the girl, then she is expected. Let her in this instant before she catches her death of cold. The door opened once more. A woman who looked to be in her 60s stood there, wearing a dress of rich purple silk with her silver hair pinned up perfectly. Her eyes were sharp, but had a kindness to them, and she sized Elena up in a way that said she was used to figuring people out fast. "You must be Miss Cross," the woman said. "I am Adelaide Hartwell. You'll have to forgive Thomas. He gets a little overprotective when we have company. Come on in, child. Get out of that wind." Elena stepped inside, and the warmth felt like walking into another world. The entry hall was even grander up close, with fancy wood walls, paintings in gold frames, and a huge staircase that swept upstairs. And it was full of people. Men stood around in fine suits, and women wore gowns that likely cost more than Elena could make in a whole year. They all held champagne glasses, their jewelry sparkling under the bright lights. The whole place buzzed with an easy kind of confidence that comes from never having to wonder where your next dollar is coming from. Elena could feel every single person turn to look at her. She felt them judging her shabby coat, her mended dress, and the trail dust on her boots. "I do apologize for all this commotion," Mrs. Hartwell said, leading Elena to a less crowded spot. "My son's engagement party got started about an hour ago. I had no idea you were arriving today, otherwise I would have made sure things were ready for you." "Engagement?" Elena's heart just sank. "Oh, I am so sorry. I wouldn't have intruded for the world." "The letter said November 15th, and today is the 15th, Mrs. Hartwell said with a little smile. "I'm the one who ought to be apologizing. I've been running 2 households, planning this circus of a party, and it seems I've lost track of my own calendar." She gave Elena's arm a gentle squeeze. "But you are here now, and I'm not about to send you back out there. We have a room all ready for you upstairs. You can go on up, rest a bit, and I'll have a supper tray sent to you. We can talk about the sewing work tomorrow morning." Relief washed over Elena so strong it nearly made her legs give out. "Thank you, truly." Mrs. Hartwell started to lead her to the grand staircase, but they'd only gone up a few steps when a man's loud voice echoed through the hall. "Adelaide, there you are. We've been looking all over for you." A heavy-set man in a pricey suit marched right up to them, his face red from too much champagne. A woman covered in diamonds followed him, along with a young couple that looked completely uninterested. "Senator Morrison," Mrs. Hartwell said, her voice smooth and polite. "I was just—" "We need to find Caleb," the senator cut in. "He's vanished again, and the Fairfax family is ready to make the official announcement. It's hard to have an engagement party when the groom has gone missing, isn't it?" A muscle in Mrs. Hartwell's jaw tightened, but her smile never faded. "I imagine he just stepped outside for a moment. You know how my son feels about large gatherings." "Well, he better start feeling different, and soon," Morrison said with a chuckle that had no humor in it. "This marriage is a big deal for our families and for the future of this whole territory." His eyes then slid over to Elena, dismissing her completely. "And who is this?" "This is a guest," Mrs. Hartwell said, her voice firm. "Doesn't look like any guest I've ever seen," Morrison mumbled, his gaze crawling over Elena's worn-out clothes with obvious contempt. "Then again, I suppose Caleb always did have some strange tastes." The insult hit Elena like a physical blow. She felt her face get hot, but she kept her expression calm and her chin up. She had faced down worse things than the scorn of a drunk politician. "If you will please excuse us," Mrs. Hartwell said, her voice turning to ice. "I was just showing Miss Cross to her room." But the senator wasn't listening anymore. He was already turning back to the party, waving his group along. "You find that boy of yours, Adelaide, before Victor Fairfax runs out of patience." Mrs. Hartwell waited until they were a good distance away, before she let out a long, quiet sigh. "That man is absolutely unbearable," she muttered to herself. Then, louder, she said, "Come along, my dear. Let's get you settled in before another fool decides to be rude." They climbed the stairs to the second floor, and the party noise softened to a faint hum. The hallway was long and quiet, with lamps on the wall making soft circles of light on the thick rug. Mrs. Hartwell stopped at a door toward the far end. "This room will be yours," she said, pushing it open to show a cozy space. The sight nearly took Elena's breath away. There was a four-poster bed with a thick quilted coverlet, a washstand holding a real glass mirror, and a window that looked out over the valley. The last bit of daylight was painting the hills all shades of orange and pink. "It is just beautiful," Elena whispered. "I will have some supper sent right up. You get some rest tonight. We can talk about your work in the morning." Mrs. Hartwell stopped in the doorway, and for a moment her face softened. "And listen, Miss Cross, do not ever let men like that Morrison fella make you feel small. You are worth 10 of him, fancy coat or no fancy coat." The door clicked shut, leaving Elena standing alone in more luxury than she had ever imagined. She put her little satchel down and ran a hand across the smooth bedspread. She allowed herself just one moment to fall apart. Sitting on the edge of that fine bed, she finally let the tears come. They were tears of relief and pure exhaustion, and for the deep, gnawing fear that had been her only friend for months, which was finally letting go. She was safe. At least for tonight, she was safe. A knock came about an hour later. Elena had already washed her face and put on her only other dress, a dark blue cotton number that was mended with care, but clean. She opened the door, thinking a maid was bringing her food. But instead, a young woman stood there in a sage-green dress, her blonde hair curled just so, and her eyes sharp with curiosity. "So you must be the seamstress," the woman said, her eyes traveling from Elena's head to her toes. "I am Beatrice Morrison, the senator's daughter." She did not bother waiting for an invitation, just swept on into the room like someone who had never been told no in her life. "Mother sent me to inform you that supper is running late. The kitchen is just swamped with the party." Her smile was all teeth. "Of course, you are welcome to come down and join the festivities. We have more than enough food." Elena knew a test when she saw one. It was the same kind of challenge she had dealt with 100 times back on the poor side of Denver. Girls from the good families always wanted to see if she would make a fool of herself. "That is very kind of you," Elena answered, choosing her words with care. "But I would surely hate to intrude on a private family get-together." "Oh, it is not all that private," Beatrice breezed. "Seems like half the territory is down there. One more person would not make a bit of difference." She drifted over to the window, dragging her fingertips along the sill. "Though I reckon you might feel a little out of place. These kinds of parties can be overwhelming if you are not accustomed to them." And there it was. The quiet cruelty, all wrapped up in fake concern. "I do appreciate the invitation," Elena said, her voice steady as a rock. "But I am just bone-tired from my travels." Beatrice turned back around, a calculating look in her eyes. "Well, suit yourself. But you ought to know folks downstairs are already talking, wondering why Mrs. Hartwell would bring in a strange woman during her son's own engagement party. Some are saying it is mighty disrespectful to the Fairfax family." She walked to the door, then paused right on the threshold. "I just figured you would want to know what people are thinking." She was gone before Elena could even think of a reply, the sound of her footsteps disappearing down the hall. Elena shut the door and leaned her whole body against it, her heart thumping in her chest. She should have known. She should have realized that showing up tonight, looking the way she did, was bound to cause a stir. Rich folks always had to find something to whisper about, someone new to look down on. She went to the window, pressing her forehead to the cool glass. Down below, guests were spilling out onto the back terrace, their laughter floating up on the night air. Lanterns dangled from the tree limbs, making shadows dance across the perfectly kept gardens. Somewhere, a string quartet was playing, and the music mixed with all the talking and the clinking of glasses. It was a beautiful scene. It was also a world where she would never fit in. She was just about to turn away when her eyes caught him. A man was standing all by himself at the very edge of the terrace, half covered by the shadows. He was tall with broad shoulders, and he stood as stiff as a board. Even from way up here, Elena could tell he was not enjoying the party one bit. He stood there like a man just trying to get through it, not celebrate it. His dark suit seemed to make him look more alone instead of a part of the crowd. As she watched, a woman in a fancy pink dress walked up to him, reaching for his arm. He took a step back, shaking his head no. The woman kept trying, her hands moving more and more. Finally, he just turned and walked away from the whole party, vanishing into the dark beyond the lantern light. Elena wondered if that was Caleb Hartwell, the groom who kept slipping away from his own engagement party. But even though she was worn out, sleep just would not come. Elena laid in that strange bed, listening to the party go on downstairs. She tried not to think about tomorrow, or the job she was hired to do, or if Mrs. Hartwell would start to regret bringing her here once she saw how everyone was reacting. Around midnight, her stomach was growling so loud it seemed to echo in the room, so Elena gave up on sleep. She lit the little lamp by the bed and decided to sneak downstairs. Not to the party, never to the party, but maybe she could find the kitchen. She hoped to find a little bread or cheese without being a bother. She wrapped her shawl tight around her shoulders and slipped out into the hall. The house was a little quieter now, but she could still hear the faint sound of music and chatter coming from downstairs. She found a staircase for the servants and went down carefully, following the smell of roasted meat and fresh-baked bread. The kitchen was warm and bright. The only person there was a young woman washing dishes in a big stone sink. She looked up when Elena came in, her face a little suspicious. "I'm so sorry to bother you," Elena said in a rush. "I'm staying upstairs and I missed my supper. I was just hoping to find a little something. I do not want to be any trouble." The girl's face softened up right away. "You are the seamstress, are you not, Miss Cross?" Elena nodded and the girl smiled. "I am Mary. Mrs. Hartwell told us all to look after you." She dried her hands on her apron. "You sit right down. I will fix you a good plate." Elena started to say no, but Mary was already moving, getting out cold chicken, fresh bread, butter, and a slice of cheese. She put it all on the wooden table with a big glass of milk. "Thank you so much," Elena said, and she truly meant it. "You have got to eat," Mary said, her voice firm. "You look about half-starved." She went back to her dishes, and then said over her shoulder, "Do not you pay any mind to those fancy folks upstairs. They get like this every time there's a big to-do, all full of themselves and their opinions." Elena took a bite of the bread, and it tasted so good she almost sighed out loud. Real butter, bread fresh from the oven. When was the last time she had eaten anything that was not 3 days old? "I met Miss Morrison," Elena said between bites. "She seemed a bit concerned that I was here." Mary let out a little snort. "Beatrice Morrison is concerned about anything that she thinks might get in her way. She has had her sights set on Mr. Caleb for years now, but he never paid her any attention." She lowered her voice like she was telling a secret. "Truth be told, nobody saw this engagement to Miss Fairfax coming either. It just happened out of the blue about 6 weeks ago. The rumor is that it is all about politics. Her daddy and Senator Morrison have some business deals together, and they want the Hartwell land and name tied up in their plans." Elena knew she should not ask. It was not any of her business, but she could not help her curiosity. "And Mr. Hartwell, what is it that he wants?" Mary's face turned serious. "Well, that is the big question, is it not? He is a good man, Miss Cross. He is fair with all his workers and honest in his business. But he is also a very private man. He keeps all his feelings locked up inside." She shook her head. "All I know for sure is that he has not cracked a smile, not once, since they announced this engagement. And tonight, at his own party, he looks like a man walking to his own hanging." The picture of that lonely man at the edge of the terrace flashed in Elena's mind. His stiff shoulders, the way he pulled back from that woman in the pink dress, like her touch was a hot iron. "That is just sad," Elena said quietly. "That is just life for folks like us," Mary answered. "We do not always get to choose. We do what we have to do to get by." She pointed at Elena's almost empty plate. "You want some more?" "No, thank you. This was absolutely perfect." Elena stood up and carried her plate to the sink. "Let me help you finish up." "Absolutely not," Mary said, shooing her away with her hands. "You are a guest in this house. Now you go on back to bed. Tomorrow is going to be here before you know it." Elena thanked her one more time and slipped back towards the servants' stairs. But as she started to climb, she heard voices coming from somewhere close. Loud, angry voices that made her stop right where she was. "I absolutely insist, Caleb. You have been hiding out all evening." "I ain't been hiding, Mother. I've just been trying to catch my breath." Elena stopped dead in her tracks. She knew good and well she ought to head on up the stairs and mind her own business. But something in that man's voice, a deep-down weariness beneath all the words, held her right there on the spot. "This is important," Mrs. Hartwell said, and you could hear the strain in her voice. "The Fairfaxes expect a certain amount of courtesy. Margaret has been asking for you. Margaret ain't any more interested in finding me than I am in being found." The sound of boots paced across the hardwood floor. "This whole arrangement is a sham, and you know it. What I know is that you gave your word on this engagement. I gave my word to protect this ranch from Morrison's political games. That doesn't mean I have to put on a happy face about it." A long quiet settled between them. When Mrs. Hartwell spoke again, her voice was a bit softer. "Caleb, son, I know this isn't what you wanted, but sometimes we have to—" "What? Do what's necessary." His laugh didn't have a lick of humor in it, I'm well aware. "I've been doing what's necessary my whole life. Tonight is just one more show. If you just give Margaret a chance. I've given her every chance there is. She's a perfectly fine woman who deserves a man who can truly love her. That man isn't me." His voice got lower, rough, with a feeling that sounded a lot like grief. "I will not do that to another woman, Mother. I refuse to pretend I can give something I just don't have in me anymore." A tightness grew in Elena's chest. She didn't know this man's story, didn't know what had carved that hollowness into his voice. But she recognized the sound of it. It was the very same sound she'd heard in her own voice after her daddy passed, after the bills started piling up, and after it sunk in that just wanting a different life wasn't enough to make it happen. "Then what will you do?" Mrs. Hartwell asked, her voice soft. "The same thing I always do. Get through the night, face what comes tomorrow, and keep on moving forward." With that, Elena turned and quietly climbed the stairs, her heart hurting for a man she didn't even know. She understood that way of thinking all too well, the simple act of enduring, of putting one foot in front of the other, even when you can't see the path clear ahead. She should have gone right to her room, locked her door, crawled into bed, and stayed a country mile away from the drama happening in the Hartwell house. But Elena had always had a curious streak that got her into trouble. Instead of going up to the second floor, she felt herself pulled toward the music and talk of the party. Not to be a part of it, heavens no, but just to get a look, to try and make sense of this new world she'd walked into. She found a little alcove just off the main hall, half hidden behind a big potted fern, where she could see without being seen. The ballroom spread out before her, all bathed in a warm golden light. Ladies in fancy gowns spun round while crystal chandeliers threw little rainbows all over the shiny wood floors. Right in the middle of it all stood a young woman in a fancy white dress. That must be Miss Fairfax. She was pretty, all right, but in that fragile way a china doll is, with hair as pale as corn silk and a smile that looked like she'd practiced it in a mirror. She was holding court with a group of folks, laughing at something Senator Morrison said, her hand resting on the arm of— Elena's breath caught in her throat. It was the man from the terrace, Caleb Hartwell. Up close, even clear across the room, he was something else, not handsome like in a picture book. His features were too sharp for that. His jaw was too square. His dark eyes held too many shadows, but there was something powerful about him. He stood a good head taller than most men in the room. His black suit fit him just right across his broad shoulders. His dark hair was combed neat, but it looked like it was just itching to be wild, and the look on his face was pure misery. The man looked absolutely miserable. Margaret Fairfax said something, leaning in close, and he gave a polite nod, but his eyes were 1,000 miles away, and he stood as stiff as a board. When she reached up to fix his collar, a familiar gesture that staked her claim on him, Elena saw his jaw tighten, saw him fight the urge to pull back. That poor soul looks like he'd rather be wrangling rattlesnakes in a dust storm. Elena nearly jumped out of her skin, turning to find a man leaning against the wall beside her little hideout. He was younger than Caleb, maybe 25, with a friendly smile and eyes that were sharp and smart under that casual air. "I didn't mean to be nosy," Elena said in a hurry. "Neither did I," the man replied with a grin. "But here we are, both of us hiding in the shadows while the whole place goes up in flames." He held out his hand. James Hartwell, the younger brother who's always a bit of a letdown. Elena Cross. She shook his hand, feeling the calluses that told her he wasn't just some rich man's son playing at work. "Ah," James said, "the mysterious seamstress who's caused such a stir. Beatrice Morrison has been talking up a storm about you for the last hour. She figures you're either a long-lost cousin, an old flame, or a spy from a rival ranch." In spite of herself, Elena cracked a smile. "I'm none of those things, just a woman looking for work." "Well, then you've definitely come to the wrong social," James said, his eyes wandering back to the ballroom. "This whole shindig is a disaster fixing to happen. My brother looks like he's about to make a run for it. Margaret looks like she's putting on a play for the whole county, and Senator Morrison is about 3 drinks shy of picking a fight with anybody who even looks sideways at his plans for this territory." "Then why'd he go along with it?" Elena asked. "Mr. Caleb, I mean, if he's so dang unhappy." James's easy smile faded. "Because my brother has spent every day of his life doing what he figures is right instead of what he actually wants for himself. Our father built this ranch from scratch, and when he passed, Caleb took it all on his shoulders. The land, the debts, the well-being of every soul who works here. Morrison has been trying for years to get his hands on our water rights and grazing land for his railroad schemes. Tying up with the Fairfax family gives Caleb the political cover he needs." He shook his head. "But it's costing him his freedom, his life, any shot he might have at real happiness." Elena felt that old familiar tightness in her chest, the kind of understanding you get from living the same hard truth. Sometimes just getting by don't leave a whole lot of room for being happy. "No," James agreed in a quiet voice. "But that doesn't mean we ever stop wanting it." They stood there in a comfortable quiet, watching the whole show play out. Then, across the ballroom, Elena spotted a man stumbling through the crowd. He was older, with a face red as a beet and already half in the bag. He was making a beeline for Caleb and Margaret, and the look on his face spelled trouble with a capital T. "Who is that?" she asked. James cursed under his breath. "Victor Fairfax, that's Margaret's father, and he looks 3 sheets to the wind." He stood up straighter. "This is not going to end pretty." It surely didn't. Victor Fairfax got to the group and grabbed Caleb's arm with a grip that was more forceful than friendly. "There's the groom," he boomed for everyone to hear, "keeping your new bride hidden from the rest of us all evening. Come on, Caleb. Let's make this announcement proper. Show everybody what this alliance is all about." Caleb's face went perfectly still, showing nothing. "Sir, maybe we ought to just wait a spell." Victor just laughed, and his voice boomed across the whole room. "We have been waiting all night long. My daughter deserves her celebration." He pulled Margaret up to the front, then took a hold of Caleb's hand and laid it right over Margaret's. There now. A promise made in front of everybody. Hartwell land and Fairfax influence finally joined together. Folks started clapping, but it was a weak, scattered thing, like they weren't sure what to make of it. Margaret's smile looked like it was painted on and hurting her. And Caleb, well, Caleb looked like a coyote caught in a leg-hold trap. Senator Morrison came forward, lifting up his champagne glass. "To the happy couple, may this union bring prosperity to," but he never got to finish saying it. That is when the drunk fella, some business partner of Morrison's that Elena didn't know, grabbed her arm and yanked her clear out of the shadows and into the middle of the ballroom. "Well, there she is," he slurred, his grip tight enough to leave a mark. "The little seamstress. I have been watching you, pretty thing. You thought you could hide, but I went and found you." Every single eye in that room swung to her. Elena tried to pull her arm back, but he held on tight. his other hand reaching for her waist. "Come on now. Do not be so bashful. Girls like you are here to entertain the men, are you not?" Shame burned through her like whiskey down a raw throat. She could feel them all judging her, hear the whispers starting up, the things they were thinking about who she was and what she was doing there. "Let me go," she said, her voice steady even though fear was crawling up her throat. "Not just yet," he grinned. "I have not had my dance. I do believe the lady asked you to let her go." That voice cut through the ballroom like a well-honed knife, cold and sharp, and not about to be argued with. Caleb Hartwell stood about 10 feet away, his face looking like it was carved out of granite. But his eyes were burning with something dangerous. The drunk man gave a shaky little laugh. "Now hold on, Caleb, no need to get all high and mighty. We are just having a little fun here. Let her go." The whole room had fallen dead quiet. Even the musicians had put down their instruments. The man let go of Elena's arm and stumbled back a step. No harm done, right? Just a little misunderstanding. "A misunderstanding?" Caleb said it again, real soft, as he started walking forward with the smooth and easy grace of a predator. "You put your hands on a woman without her say-so, shamed her in front of 100 people, and now you want to call it a misunderstanding." "Caleb," Senator Morrison cut in, his voice all tight and strained. "I'm sure Edwards meant no disrespect. Perhaps we should all just know." Caleb stopped about 3 feet from Elena. His eyes swept over her for a second, sizing things up, checking for any harm before they landed back on Edwards. "You will apologize to the lady, and then you will get out of my house." "Lady?" Edwards sneered, getting bold from the whiskey and his own foolishness. "Oh, come on, Caleb. We all know her kind. A seamstress?" He snorted. "Is that the word you are using for them these days?" The ugly words just hung there in the air like poison smoke. Caleb's hands balled up into fists at his sides. For a second, Elena was sure he was about to lay that man out flat. But instead, he did something that was a whole lot more shocking. He turned to her, and his dark eyes met hers with a power that just took her breath away. And then he smiled, just a small, slow curve of his lips that did not touch his eyes, but it seemed to change the whole world. "Gentlemen," he said, his voice low, never taking his eyes off Elena, "let me clear up any confusion for y'all." He reached out for her hand, and Elena, too shocked to do anything else, let him take it. His palm felt warm and rough with calluses, and steady. He lifted her hand to his lips and pressed a kiss right there on her knuckles. It was such a personal, deliberate move that you could hear folks gasp all through the room. Then Caleb Hartwell turned to face everyone, still holding onto Elena's hand, and said 5 little words that were about to change both of their lives forever. "Gentlemen, I would like you to meet my wife." The silence that came after was so complete you could have heard a pin drop. Elena could not breathe, could not think, could not make sense of what just happened. Margaret Fairfax made a noise like a hurt animal. Victor Fairfax's face turned a deep shade of purple. Senator Morrison's champagne glass just slipped out of his hand and shattered all over the floor, and Mrs. Adelaide Hartwell, who was standing by the door, put her hand over her mouth to cover what looked an awful lot like a smile. Caleb's hand tightened on Elena's, not enough to hurt, but firm, like he was holding them both steady in the middle of the hurricane he had just started. "What?" Victor Fairfax finally managed to choke out. "What in the world are you talking about? You're engaged to my daughter." "That was a mistake," Caleb said, "calm as you please. A mistake I am fixing right now." He looked over at Margaret, and for the very first time all evening, his face softened with real regret. "Miss Fairfax, I am truly sorry. This was wrong of me. The whole thing was wrong, but I cannot marry you because I am already married to somebody else." "When?" Morrison demanded. "This is just crazy. When did this supposed marriage happen?" 3 months ago, Caleb said without even a flicker of doubt. "We did it quietly in Denver." He looked down at Elena again, and she saw the question in his eyes, begging her. "Please just go along with this, just for right now." And Elena, a woman with nothing left to lose and maybe everything to gain, a woman who knew all about being desperate and how to survive, she made her choice. She squeezed his hand right back. "I am sorry," she said in a soft voice, looking around the room but talking straight to the man standing next to her. "We never meant to fool anybody. We just wanted to wait and tell his family in the proper way, but—" She let her voice fade out. She would let them figure out the rest. "This is a lie," Victor Fairfax snarled. "A desperate see-through lie to wiggle out of this engagement." "Then prove it," Caleb challenged him. "Go on and write to the courthouse in Denver. Check the records for yourself. You will find them. It was a bluff. It had to be a bluff." But he said it with so much confidence that you could see a flicker of doubt cross Victor's face. Margaret Fairfax had gone white as a sheet. "Caleb," she whispered, "please do not do this." For just 1 second, Elena saw something that looked like real pity on Caleb's face. Then it hardened back into stone. "I am sorry, Margaret," he said, his voice quiet. "You deserve the truth. And the truth is, I could never have given you what you deserved. It is better for you to know that now instead of years down the road." He turned, still holding Elena's hand, and looked at his mother. "I apologize for this scene, for all of it. This should have been handled in a different way." Mrs. Hartwell looked from her son to Elena, and you could not read a single thing on her face. Then she gave a slow nod. "I believe," she said with amazing calm, "that it is time for our guests to be leaving. The party is very clearly over. The room just exploded. Morrison and Victor were both trying to talk at the same time, yelling for proof, threatening lawsuits, saying the whole thing was a joke. But Caleb paid them no mind. He just walked toward the door, pulling Elena along gently beside him, leaving all that chaos behind them. They went up the main staircase without a word, the shouting just fading away below them. When they got to the second-floor landing, Caleb finally stopped and let go of her hand. "I am sorry," he said, his voice sounding rough. "I had no business pulling you into the middle of that." Elena's legs felt like they might give out. Her hand was still tingling from where he had held it. "You saved me from that man, from what he was thinking about me." "I just swapped his ideas for my own," Caleb said. "They are different, but I was just as presumptuous." He ran a hand through his hair, messing up the neat way it was combed. "The truth of it is, I panicked. I saw a way out of that engagement, a way out from under Morrison's thumb, and I took it without thinking what it might cost you." "And what will it cost me?" He looked at her then, really looked at her, not at her old dress or her patched-up coat, but at her. "Everything, or maybe nothing at all. It all depends on what happens next." "And what does happen next?" Caleb leaned back against the banister, and you could see the weariness settle over him like a heavy blanket. "Tomorrow, Morrison and Fairfax are going to start digging. They will check the records in Denver. They will be asking questions. When they do not find any proof of a marriage, they will be right back here demanding to know why. This house is going to become a battlefield," he met her eyes. "Unless we make it real." Elena felt her heart just stop in her chest. "Real?" "Not a real marriage," he said real fast, "but a real arrangement, papers, documents, enough proof to make the lie hold up." He stood up straight, and just like that he was all business, a rancher making a deal. "I can pay you, pay off any debts you have, and set you up with your own dress shop somewhere far away from here. Once this whole mess is over, all you have to do is pretend to be my wife for about 6 months, maybe a year, just long enough for the scandal to quiet down and for me to get myself untangled from Morrison's political ambitions." "Pretend to be your wife," Elena repeated, saying the words slowly. "Only in public. You would have your own room, your own life. We would just have to act friendly when other folks are around." His face turned grim. "I know it is a terrible thing to ask you, but I am asking anyway. I am asking because I am desperate, and because you look like a woman who knows what desperate feels like." He was right. She did understand. Elena thought about her sister back in Denver, all alone in that drafty little cottage waiting for money that might never show up. She thought about the bank notices, the final warning, the deadline that was coming at them like a runaway train. She thought about all the years ahead of her, just scraping by, surviving, but never really getting ahead. How much? she asked, her voice quiet. Caleb named a number that made her head swim. It was enough to save the cottage. Enough to open her own shop. Enough to change her entire life. And you are sure this will work? No, he admitted, but it is the only card I have left to play. Elena looked at this stranger who had just claimed her as his wife to save them both from ruin. She saw the bone-deep tiredness in his eyes, the tightness in his shoulders, and the sliver of desperate hope he was trying so hard to hide. He was betting everything on her saying yes, trusting her with his freedom, his ranch, and his future. She remembered what Mary had said down in the kitchen. We do not get to choose. We just do what we have to do to survive. 1 year, Elena said, and you pay off all my family's debts, not just mine. And I want the shop in Denver close to my sister. A look of pure relief washed over Caleb's face. Done. And one more thing. All. Elena took a step closer, lifting her chin to look him square in the eye. When this whole thing is done and we go our separate ways, you don't get to pass judgment on how I choose to live my life after this. You don't get to check up on me or have an opinion on what I do. We walk away, and that's the end of it. No strings attached, no looking back. Agreed. He held out his hand. So, do we have a deal? Elena looked at his outstretched hand, calloused and strong, offering her a way out that was tangled all up in a lie. She thought about all the things that could go wrong, about the scandal and the shame and the chance that this falsehood might just ruin them both. Then she thought about her sister's face when she could tell her the cottage was safe, about seeing a little shop with her name right there on the glass, about a future that was more than just plain surviving. She took his hand. We have a deal. His fingers wrapped around hers, warm and solid, sealing their pact. For better or for worse, Elena Cross had just become Elena Hartwell. At least in writing, at least for the time being. As they stood there in the hallway, their hands clasped in an agreement that felt like both salvation and a curse, neither one of them saw Mrs. Adelaide Hartwell watching from the shadows down below, the look on her face full of thought. Well now, she whispered to herself, this is either going to be a train wreck or the best dang thing that ever happened to that stubborn-as-a-mule boy of mine. Only time would tell which it was. But downstairs, the party was winding down. The guests were heading home, taking with them the biggest piece of scandalous gossip Wyoming had seen in a coon's age. And in the middle of all that commotion, a lie started to take hold. A lie that was going to grow into something that neither Caleb nor Elena could have ever seen coming. The deal was made. Now came the hard part, living with it. The morning sun had not yet even peeked over the mountains. Elena woke up when she saw a cream-colored envelope that had been pushed under her door. A single sentence was inside, written in a man's neat handwriting, which said, "My study, 7 in the morning. We need to make this thing official." She put on her best dress with care, a blue cotton one she had worn to job interviews and Sunday services, and made her way downstairs. After the commotion of the previous night, the house was unnervingly quiet. The grand room had been cleared of all its party decorations, showing its elegant structure underneath. Her steps made a lonely sound on the polished floors. Caleb's study was located in the back part of the house, with a view of the eastern hills. She knocked on the door 2 times before he answered. "Come on in." He was standing behind a huge oak desk that was loaded with papers, and he was in his work clothes now, with dark pants and a simple shirt with the sleeves pushed up to his elbows, showing strong, muscular forearms. His hair was still wet, like he had just taken a bath, and the dark circles under his eyes told her he had slept just as badly as she had. "Coffee?" he asked, pointing to a pot on a side table. "Yes, please." Elena poured a cup for herself with hands that felt like shaking, but she forced them to be still. The coffee was powerful and bitter, and it helped her accept this unbelievable situation. Caleb kept standing, looking over the documents in front of him with the intense concentration of a general mapping out a strategy. "I have been up since 4, he stated directly, trying to figure out every trick Morrison and Fairfax will pull to prove our marriage is a fake." He raised his head, and his dark eyes looked straight into hers, making her feel uneasy. "They are going to dig into everything. Your past, your family, where you have been for the last few months. They will be searching for any little thing that does not add up." "Well then, we had better get our stories lined up," Elena replied, hearing a surprising firmness in her own voice. A quick look of what might have been respect passed over his face. "That is right." He pointed to a chair on the other side of his desk. "Have a seat. This is going to take some time." For the next 2 hours, they built their fictional story one careful piece at a time. They had supposedly met in Denver 4 months ago, which was Caleb's idea, during a time he was there for business. Elena had been an employee at a dress shop, which was true enough for her to give convincing details if someone asked. They had felt a connection to each other, even though they came from different worlds. He had courted her in private, trying to keep his mother from getting involved, or Morrison from using their relationship for political gain. "We got married in a little ceremony," Caleb said as he took down notes. "It was just the 2 of us and a couple of witnesses we paid to keep quiet. No relatives, no big announcement. We were planning to tell everybody after the busy season was over, but then Morrison started pushing for the engagement to Margaret and I got scared. I made a bad decision. I went along with something I had no business going along with." "Why did you not tell him about me back then?" Elena inquired, tracing the storyline they were inventing. "Fear," Caleb answered plainly. "I was afraid he would figure out a way to use you to hurt me, and that part is completely true. Morrison would do that in a heartbeat." His jaw clenched. "He has been trying to take over this ranch for a long time. My father told him no, and I have told him no. Partnering up with the Fairfax family would have given him the political power he needed to make me sell. And now, well, now I have completely ruined that possibility." He gazed out the window at the land that stretched out to the horizon. "Now Morrison is my sworn enemy, not just a recurring headache, but at least this way is honest." Elena took a sip of her coffee and watched him. In the light of day, without the noise of the party, she could see him better. She saw the worry lines around his eyes and the way his shoulders were set, which told of responsibilities he had carried by himself for too long. He looked younger than she had initially thought. Perhaps 32 or 33, but he acted like a much older man. "What is your story?" she asked softly. "Last night you mentioned to your mother that you did not want to put another woman through this." His face closed off in an instant. "That has nothing to do with our deal. If we are going to make this story believable, I have to understand what scarred you," Elena insisted. "People will notice it. They will question why a man like you would get married to a woman like me in secret. The story has to have some real emotion to it, even if the details are made up." Caleb's hands gripped the desk tightly. For a while she was sure he was going to refuse to talk. Then he slowly took a seat, and the movement seemed heavy with a sense of defeat. "Her name was Catherine," he said, his voice sounding deliberately empty. "We were engaged 6 years ago. She was beautiful, smart, and from a respectable family. I believed—" He paused and took a deep breath. "I believed she loved me, that she loved this kind of life, this land. We had it all planned out, the wedding, our future, the children we would raise on this ranch." His laugh was full of bitterness. 3 weeks before we were supposed to get married, I caught her in the barn with my father's business associate. She confessed that she could never love a man as strict and distant as me, and that she had only said yes to the proposal because of my wealth and social standing. She had been carrying on with him for months. Elena felt a pang of unexpected compassion in her chest. "I am so sorry." "Do not be. She was not wrong." Caleb looked her in the eyes, and the hollowness in them was more chilling than anger would have been. "I am strict. I am distant. I have spent the last 6 years confirming everything she said, putting up walls so tall that nobody can get close. When my mother and Morrison began insisting on the engagement to Margaret, I just went along with it because it made no difference to me. Margaret was not in love with me. I was not in love with her. It was a simple, safe arrangement, exactly the kind of thing I deserved. That is not correct, Elena found herself saying before she could stop. You do not know me. No, she admitted. But I do know how it feels to think you are not worthy of happiness just because someone else told you so. My own father told me I was useless every single day. He said I would never achieve anything, that I was a heavy load to carry, and that the world would be a better place if I were not in it. She placed her coffee cup down on the desk with a very deliberate motion. He was mistaken, and so was Catherine. Caleb just looked at her, and she could see some unreadable emotion shifting behind his eyes. Then he turned his attention back to his documents, and his voice was scratchy when he next spoke. We need to keep going. Morrison is going to be here by noon, and we have to be prepared. They used up another hour perfecting their fabricated story and committing the details to memory. The name of the Denver courthouse where they had supposedly registered their marriage, the date of their made-up wedding, the hotel where they had supposedly spent their first night as a married couple. Caleb had already dispatched his ranch foreman to Denver with orders to create a false paper trail, even if it meant bribing some clerks to backdate official records. It was a big risk and probably against the law, but Caleb tackled it with the same steely resolve he probably used for every other difficult challenge he had ever faced in his life. There is just one last item, he said at last, sliding a stack of documents over to her. This is our actual contract, the real deal between us, the one that no one else is ever going to lay eyes on. Eleanor went through it with great attention to detail. The conditions were fair, even more than fair. $5,000 as soon as she signed to be sent straight to pay off her family's debts. An additional $5,000 after 12 months. The legal title to a storefront in Denver transferred into her name, regardless of whether she stayed for the entire year, a place to live and food at the ranch for the whole time, and an allowance for clothes so she could look like a rancher's wife. And what happens if I do not fulfill the contract? She inquired. You get to keep whatever you have already been given. I am not a cruel man, Miss Cross. I'm not going to penalize you for having a change of heart. Elena, she corrected him, if we are supposed to be married, it would probably be a good idea for you to call me by my first name. Elena, he said again, and there was something in the way he pronounced it with such caution, as if he were trying out the feel of the name, that made her heart beat a little faster. There is one final condition, and it is the most critical one. He leaned in closer, his face completely serious. No romantic attachments, no hopes for anything more than what we have put in writing. This is a purely business deal. When our time is up, we will go our separate ways like two people who once helped each other out. That is all. Elena looked at the condition, which was written in that same meticulous handwriting. It seemed like such a straightforward rule, so simple to accept when you were sitting on the opposite side of a desk from a man you hardly knew, making up stories to deceive everyone. Why? She asked. Why what? Why is that rule so important to you? Caleb's expression remained unchanged, but his knuckles grew white as he gripped the side of the desk. Because feelings make things messy. Because individuals get their hearts broken when their hopes do not match up with the facts. Because I cannot bear to have another person look at me the same way Catherine did, like I was a letdown that she had to put up with. And you believe I would do that? I believe anyone would, he responded softly, given enough time and closeness. So we will not allow it that time. We will keep our distance, treat this like a job, get through the year, and maybe part ways as friends if we are fortunate. Elena reached for the pen he had placed next to the contract. Friends. That was more than she had had for many months, and a whole lot less than the confusing emotion that was growing in her heart as she watched this wounded man try so desperately to shield himself. 1 year, she declared. No feelings, just a business arrangement. Just business, he confirmed. She wrote her name at the end of the contract, Elena Cross, who would soon become Elena Hartwell, and pushed it back toward him. Caleb added his signature beneath hers and then took out a little box from a drawer in his desk. You are going to need this, he stated, opening it to show a plain gold ring. This belonged to my grandmother. My mother thought you ought to have something authentic to wear. Elena's throat felt tight as he took the ring out of its velvet holder. It was stunning in its simplicity, a slender gold band with tiny flowers engraved on it, worn down from many years of use. It was a ring that had once symbolized something real, that held the significance of true promises and genuine love. I cannot, she whispered. This is just too much. It is only a prop, Caleb said, but his voice had a softer tone now. Just like everything else in this whole setup. May I? She held out her left hand, and he gently placed the ring on her finger. It was a perfect fit, feeling as if it had been meant to be there all along. His fingers, warm, rough, and gentle, stayed for a brief moment before he moved his hand away. There, he said, his voice all business once more. Now you have the look of a wife. Just then there was a knock on the door. Have had enough of it. Mrs. Hartwell walked right in without asking. Her face was a mix of worry and something that looked a lot like she was entertained. I figured you would want to know, she said. Morrison's carriage just pulled up the drive. He brought a lawyer with him. She glanced back and forth between them, her eyes landing on the ring on Elena's finger and the signed papers on the desk. Are you two ready for this? No, Caleb said, as honest as could be. But we will handle it. Mrs. Hartwell walked over to Elena and gently took her hand to get a better look at the ring. I have not seen this in 20 years, she said softly. My mother-in-law wore it every single day of her marriage, for 53 years, right up until the day she passed. She looked up right into Elena's eyes. I do not know what kind of game you two are playing or why you are playing it, but that ring has only ever been on the finger of women who truly loved the men they married. You remember that? Before Elena could even think of what to say, Mrs. Hartwell swept right out of the room, leaving a heavy silence behind her. She does not know about the contract, Caleb said. Nobody does, except for you and me. To the rest of the world, including my own family, we are really and truly married. Then I suppose we had better put on a good show for them, Elena said. She stood up and smoothed down her skirt. Her heart was hammering against her ribs, but her hands were perfectly steady. Where do you want me to be when Morrison gets here? Caleb stood up too, walking around the big desk. For the very first time since she had met him, something that looked like a real smile touched his mouth. It was a grim smile, but it was genuine. Right by my side, he said, exactly where a wife belongs. They met Morrison in the formal parlor, a room that smelled like beeswax and old money. The senator had his lawyer with him, a sharp-eyed man named Blackwood who was carrying a leather case, full of legal papers. Victor Fairfax was a no-show, which told everyone he was either too riled up to attend or busy hatching a worse plan. Morrison didn't take a seat. He wore a path in the carpet like a cornered coyote, his face a storm of fury he could barely hold back. He got right to the point, saying, "This is a complete sham. A wild story from a man who's clearly desperate." He then asked, "Did you honestly think we wouldn't look into this?" Caleb answered him as cool as a cucumber. "Investigate all you like." He stood with one hand resting gently on the small of Elena's back. It was a gesture that looked like simple possession, but it sent a jolt right through her. "You'll find marriage papers filed down in Denver on July 23rd. You'll find the courthouse clerk who stamped them. You'll even find the witnesses who put their names on the line." Morrison just sneered. "Fakes. Every last bit of it is fake." "Then prove it." Blackwood placed his briefcase on a nearby table and pulled out a stack of documents with slow, deliberate care. "Oh, we'll prove it, Mr. Hartwell. We plan to talk to every single clerk in that Denver courthouse. We'll track down your so-called witnesses and put them under oath. We will map out Miss Cross's every move for the last 6 months. And when we find the holes in your story, and believe me, we will, we'll have all we need for fraud charges." "Her name is Mrs. Hartwell," Caleb corrected him in a quiet, firm voice. "And you're more than welcome to try." Elena could feel the tension humming through his hand on her back, the sheer effort it took him to keep up that calm appearance. She took a small step forward, making herself the center of attention. "Senator Morrison," she began, her voice steady, "I can understand why you're upset. This news came out of nowhere and the timing is awful. But I give you my word, our marriage is real." The lie felt like ash in her mouth, but she delivered it with the same certainty she had used to persuade landlords she had rent money that wasn't there. "Caleb and I wanted to wait, to tell everyone in the right way, to give his family a chance to get used to the idea. We never intended to cause anyone any trouble." Morrison's gaze swept over her like she was nothing. "You want me to believe that Caleb Hartwell, one of the richest ranchers in all of Wyoming, secretly married a seamstress with not a penny to her name? What did he offer you? What was your price for putting on this little show?" The insult stung like a whip, but Elena stood her ground. She had been through much worse. "He promised me nothing but himself," she said. "And that's more than some folks get in a lifetime of proper arranged marriages." The whole feel of the room changed right then, a little shift in the air, and in the look on Morrison's face. He sized Elena up again, maybe realizing she wasn't the easy pushover he had figured her for. "We'll see about that," he finally grumbled. Blackwood submitted the investigation request to the territorial court. "I want every scrap of paper, every witness, every single moment of Miss Cross's life put under a microscope." He then turned his glare on Caleb. "And as for you, Caleb, you just made a mistake that's going to cost you dearly. Victor Fairfax is already rounding up the other ranchers, building a front to go after your water rights. Without the Fairfax alliance, you're exposed. I'd say you have about 6 months before you come crawling to us, begging for our help." "Then you'll be waiting a good long while," Caleb replied. Morrison stomped out of the room with Blackwood right behind him, clutching his papers and his empty threats. The second the door clicked shut, Caleb's hand fell away from Elena's back, and he walked over to the window, putting between them. "Well, that went just swimmingly," he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Elena felt her knees start to tremble. The rush that had seen her through that whole ordeal was now leaving her feeling empty and weak. "He is going to dig into every last detail." "Yes, and he is going to find precisely what we want him to find." Caleb turned, his face set like stone. "But he is right about the fallout. Without the Fairfax name backing me, I have lost some friends. The other ranchers will see this as a weakness, like I am not thinking straight. They will start to poke and prod, looking for a way to take a bite out of me." He raked a hand through his hair, a frustrated gesture that made him seem boyish for a second. "I knew this would be a fight. I just never figured it would get this ugly this fast." Just then, Mrs. Hartwell came in carrying a tea tray. She moved with the confidence of a woman who is certain that a good cup of tea could fix nearly anything. "Well," she announced, "that was quite the show, Elena. Here now. You handled Mr. Morrison perfectly. For a minute there, I almost believed you myself." Elena took the warm cup with a grateful nod, letting it chase the chill from her fingers. "I have had my share of practice lying to folks who look down on me. I can only imagine." Mrs. Hartwell settled into a chair, smoothing her skirts with an effortless grace. "Now we need to talk about what comes next. Caleb, you cannot just squirrel Elena away in this house like some kind of secret. People need to see you two out together. They need to believe this marriage is the real deal. The church social is this Sunday. You will both be there." "Mother." "Do not you dare mother me," she cut in sharply. "You made this bed. Now you have to lie in it, and lie in it properly, or that Morrison fellow will find every single crack in your story. Elena needs the right kind of clothes, a proper introduction to our neighbors, and to learn exactly how to be the wife of a man in your position. And you, she said, pointing a finger at Caleb, need to stop looking at her like she is a business deal, and start looking at her like you are a man in love. Caleb's jaw went tight. I am no actor, Mother. Then you had best learn, Mrs. Hartwell said, her voice holding no sympathy at all. Because if you cannot make people believe this marriage is real, you stand to lose it all. The ranch, your good name, your freedom from whatever scheme Morrison is cooking up. Is your pride really worth all that? The silence that hung in the room was heavy with everything they were not saying. At last, Caleb's eyes found Elena's, and she could read the question in them clear as day. Can you do this? Can you be the person I need you to be? She thought about the contract sitting in the desk upstairs, the ring on her hand, and the $5,000 that had already been wired to clear the debts that had been a shadow over her family for so long. She saw her sister's hopeful face in her mind when she had sent that telegram this morning. Everything is going to be fine now. I can do it, she said, her voice quiet but firm. Whatever you need me to do. A wave of what looked like relief washed over Caleb's face. Then we get started today. Mother is right. We need to be seen in public to make it look like this is all perfectly natural. He put his teacup down with a final thud. Come with me. I will give you the grand tour, introduce you to the foreman and some of the key men. We will ride the fence line. We can have our lunch out in the south pasture where folks can see us. We will start building this story from the ground up. I do not know how to ride, Elena admitted. Then you will ride with me. It will look romantic. The way he said it suggested it would be anything but romantic. It was just another scene in a play for an audience they could not see. They spent the rest of the day acting out the parts they had written. Caleb showed her the whole cattle operation, the breeding program his daddy had started, and that he had since grown, and the irrigation system that was the lifeblood of the land. He introduced her to men who tipped their hats and looked her over with curious eyes, and to ranch hands who knew their boss well enough to sense the tension in him, but were too polite to ever mention it. And they rode. Elena sat in front of Caleb on his big black horse, his arms a protective cage around her as he handled the reins, his body a warm, solid presence at her back. By all rights, it should have felt strange and wrong. Instead, she felt safer than she had in years. You are very good at this, she said, as they reached the top of a hill that looked out over miles of open pasture. At riding? At running a place like this? She clarified. At taking care of all the people who rely on you. She looked back over her shoulder at him. Why did you ever think you were a cold man? His arms tightened around her just a little. Because I do not feel things the right way. Aha. I do not connect with people like I ought to. Catherine was right about that much. I am better with land and cattle than I am with people. I think you connect just fine, Elena said softly. You just do not trust it anymore. He did not say anything back, but she felt the shift in his breathing. She felt the exact moment he closed himself off emotionally, even though he could not move an inch away from her without sending her tumbling off the horse. They got back just as the sun was dipping low, painting the ranch in shades of gold and deep orange. Mrs. Hartwell had already seen to it that Elena's things were moved into a guest room in the family's part of the house. Not Caleb's room, thank goodness, but close enough to keep up the appearance of a real marriage. There is a door that connects the rooms, Mrs. Hartwell explained as she showed Elena around. It locks from both sides, so you will have your privacy, but the staff will just assume you are sharing a bed, like any married couple would. She stopped in the doorway, giving Elena a long look with those clever eyes of hers. My son is a complicated man. He is wounded, stubborn, and sometimes too honorable for his own good. Whatever this arrangement is that you two have cooked up, I hope you will find it in you to be kind to him. I will try, Elena promised, and she meant it. And Elena, I hope he will be kind to you as well. That night, Elena lay in a bed that felt softer than a cloud, wearing a borrowed nightgown that likely cost more than all the clothes she had ever owned put together. She tried to make sense of the mess she had landed in. Through the wall, she could hear the faint sounds of Caleb moving in his room, the creak of floorboards, a drawer sliding open, the soft splash of water. They were husband and wife, but not really. They were living in the same house, but leading two separate lives, pretending at a closeness while keeping a careful distance between them. It was supposed to be simple, a business deal, a way to survive. A single year to get through. But as Elena felt the new ring on her finger, warm from her own skin, she started to wonder if anything that involved the human heart could ever be simple, even when you did your level best to leave the heart out of it completely. Sunday showed up far too quickly. The church social was set up on the lawn behind the little white chapel that served the whole scattered ranching community. It looked like every family from 50 miles around had come out for the spectacle of meeting Caleb Hartwell's mysterious new wife. Elena was wearing a new pale green cotton dress, one that Mrs. Hartwell had somehow managed to produce in 3 days, and it fit her like a glove. Her hair had been pinned up in a style more elegant than anything she could have done herself, twisted by his mother's own lady's maid with little pearl combs that glinted in the sunlight. "You look beautiful," Caleb said when she walked downstairs. His voice was steady, but she saw something warmer in his eyes. Maybe it was appreciation, or maybe just relief that she looked the part he needed her to play. "You clean up pretty good yourself," she answered, taking in his dark suit and crisp white shirt, and how he had wrestled his dark hair into place. He offered her his arm, and when she took it, she felt the hard muscle beneath the expensive cloth. "Remember," he said in a low voice as they walked to the carriage, "we are madly in love. We cannot get enough of each other. Every single touch, every look we share, has to sell that story." "Just business," Elena whispered back. But her heart was hammering against her ribs far too fast for it to be just anything. The church grounds were a sea of families on picnic blankets, with children chasing each other through the trees. Long tables were groaning under the weight of pies and casseroles. Conversations died down and heads turned the moment Caleb helped Elena from the carriage, his hand resting on her waist just a second longer than was proper. "Smile," he murmured into her ear. "Look like you are happy to be here." She smiled. She let him guide her into the crowd with a hand on the small of her back. A possessive gesture that was starting to feel dangerously natural. The people made way for them, staring and whispering behind their hands. Caleb. A woman in a hat so grand it could have provided its own shade came bearing down on them, like a force of nature. "Is this your mysterious bride? You simply must introduce us." "Mrs. Patterson," Caleb said, his voice full of real warmth. "May I present my wife, Elena?" "Elena, Mrs. Patterson runs the biggest cattle operation in the Northern Territory. She has forgotten more about ranching than I will ever know." Mrs. Patterson's sharp eyes looked Elena up and down, taking her measure. Elena over with the same careful eye she probably used on prize-winning cattle. "Married in secret, from what I gather. My, how romantic." The last word was heavy with doubt. "Tell me, my dear, how in the world did you first meet my Caleb?" And that was just the beginning of the gentle but firm questioning, as one woman after another came over with inquiries hidden behind polite smiles. Elena answered them all with caution, staying true to the story she and Caleb had made up, adding little details here and there to make the falsehood seem more true. Yes, their first meeting was in Denver. Yes, it was all very quick. And yes, they were very much in love. The whole time, Caleb played his role perfectly. He would touch her elbow, put a hand on her shoulder, or take her hand, building a picture of closeness with constant, measured contact. He fetched her some lemonade, filled a plate with food for her, and stood so near she could feel the warmth from his body and smell his morning soap. "You are very good at this," she whispered to him when they had a rare moment alone. "I told you I am not cold. I am just cautious." His eyes were always moving, watching the crowd. And right now, Being cautious means making sure everyone here believes I'm a man so head over heels for his wife that he can't stand to be more than a few feet away from her. Do you think it's working? Just look around, he said quietly. Elena did. She saw how folks were watching them, their expressions changing from doubt to a hesitant belief. She saw the younger women looking at them with a touch of envy. She saw the older couples nodding with the kind of satisfaction that comes from seeing young love. The lie was taking hold. They were selling it. Caleb Hartwell. A cold voice sliced through the warm afternoon air. I sure didn't figure on seeing you here. A man walked toward them, tall and silver-haired, dressed in fine clothes with a look of pure contempt on his face. Elena, you did not need a formal introduction to know this man was Victor Fairfax. Victor, Caleb said, his voice steady. How is Margaret? She is devastated, as you can imagine, though she is handling the shame of being left at the altar better than most women would. Fairfax's gaze flicked over to Elena, dismissing her in a heartbeat. I am sure she will find a suitable husband soon, one who holds honor in higher regard than foolish whims. I am sure of it, Caleb agreed. She is worthy of a man who can truly love her. And you believe you are that kind of man? Fairfax motioned toward Elena. With her? A woman you supposedly wed in secret instead of granting her the respect of a proper ceremony. A woman whose own kin is not even here to celebrate. Elena felt Caleb grow rigid beside her, could feel the anger coming off him in hot waves. Before he could say a word, before he could do something that would tear down their carefully built story, she took a step forward. Mr. Fairfax, she said softly, I am truly sorry for any hurt this situation has brought your daughter. But I will not say sorry for marrying the man I love, even if things did not happen the way everyone hoped. She reached out for Caleb's hand, weaving her fingers into his. And my family is not here because they are in Denver, dealing with problems I could not fix by myself. My husband settled those debts for me. That is the man he is. A man who shields the people he cares for, no matter the cost to himself. It was the honest truth wrapped inside a lie, and it hit its mark perfectly. Fairfax's expression shifted. First surprise, then a quick calculation, and finally a grudging respect. Well, he said at last, I suppose only time will prove what sort of union you two have truly forged. He started to walk away, then stopped. But Elena, when this all crumbles, and Morrison is working to see that it does, do not come looking for pity from folks who saw this disaster coming from the start. He left, leaving the air behind him crackling with tension. Elena's hand was still caught in Caleb's, his grip now almost tight enough to hurt. And when she glanced up at him, his face was a careful, empty mask. I am sorry, she whispered. For what? For making it all worse. I should not have spoken. You were perfect, he said, his voice rough. He drew her in, resting his forehead against her own in a way that looked close but felt like desperation. Thank you. They stayed that way for a single heartbeat. Two people faking a love story while their hearts hammered with fear and adrenaline, and another feeling neither of them dared to name. Then Caleb pulled back, his face becoming neutral again. We should be going, he said. We did what we came here to do. On the ride back home, Elena watched the landscape roll by and fought to ignore the warmth where Caleb's hand had held hers, the memory of his forehead against her own, the way her body reacted to him being so near, as if it did not know the difference between a performance and something real. No feelings, the agreement stated. Purely business. But as the silent miles passed, Elena wondered just how long they could stick to that rule when every touch, every look, every staged moment of closeness was teaching their bodies to believe the lie they were telling the whole world. And in the driver's seat, handling the horses with an easy skill, Caleb wondered the exact same thing and was terrified of the answer. The weeks that came after settled into a routine that felt nearly comfortable, which should have been Elena's first sign of trouble. She and Caleb moved through their lives like dance partners, learning a complicated set of steps. They had breakfast together in the morning room where the staff could see them, then worked apart for the day. They shared dinners with Mrs. Hartwell, where they kept up the act of happy newlyweds, and they spent their evenings in a careful closeness that never once tipped over into real intimacy. They were getting much better at the little gestures, the easy affection that married folks show without a second thought. Caleb's hand would find the small of her back as they walked through a doorway. Elena learned how to straighten his collar when it was out of place, her fingers brushing against him just long enough to suggest they knew each other well. They created their own private jokes, exchanged knowing looks, the kind of shorthand used by people who had known one another much longer than a few chaotic weeks. It was all a show. It had to be a show. But Elena was starting to forget where the acting stopped. And then, something even more dangerous began to happen. She was noticing things about him now. The way he drank his coffee, black and strong enough to float a horseshoe. How he would rub the back of his neck when the paperwork was frustrating him. The faint smile that would touch his lips when a ranch hand told a particularly awful joke. The deliberate way he handled everything, like he had learned young that being careless led to ruin. She also noticed the way he sometimes looked at her when he thought she was not watching. It was a kind of confused yearning that he would quickly hide behind a professional mask, as though he was trying to solve a math problem that kept giving him the wrong answer. "You are staring," he said one evening as they sat in the library, pretending to read books while really just sharing the same room. "I was thinking," Elena corrected, not trying to deny it, "about how peculiar this is. How we know all these little details about each other now. Your coffee, my dislike of mornings, the way you keep your desk organized. But we do not truly know one another at all." Caleb put his book down, giving her his complete attention. "What is it you want to know? What makes you happy?" The question seemed to catch him off guard. He was silent for a good long while, the firelight dancing across his face. "I am not sure I know anymore," he admitted at last. "I used to think it was the ranch, this land, watching things grow and prosper because of my work. But these days," he trailed off, shaking his head, "these days I wonder if I'm just going through the motions, just getting by instead of truly living." He looked straight at her, and the raw honesty in his eyes made her chest feel tight. "What about you? What makes Elena Cross happy?" "Hartwell," she corrected him gently. "On paper, anyway." "Hartwell," he repeated, and the way he said her new name sent a surprising warmth all through her. Elena thought about his question for a moment. "Making something beautiful with my own two hands. Tailoring something to fit just right. Watching someone put on a dress I made and feel confident, strong, and noticed." She gave a small smile. "Small things, I guess, not some big ambition." "There is nothing small about creating beauty," Caleb said, "or in making people feel noticed." Their eyes locked across the space between their chairs, and a current passed between them. Maybe it was recognition or understanding, a silent agreement that they were both people who had learned to find purpose in quiet acts of work and care because the louder kinds of happiness had always been out of their reach. Mrs. Hartwell came in then, shattering the moment like a rock through a window pane. "Oh, good, you are both in here," she said without preamble. "I have received a letter from the Hendersons. They are holding a harvest dance next Saturday and have specifically asked that you both attend. It is expected, I'm afraid. Seems like half the county will be there." Caleb's face immediately shut down. "We will make an appearance. You will do more than just show up," his mother stated firmly. "You will dance with your wife. You will mingle. You will prove to everyone that this marriage is a strong one." Despite all of Morrison's rumors and suggestions, she looked at Elena. "Do you dance, my dear?" "Not very well," Elena admitted. "I never really had the chance to learn the right way." "Well then, Caleb will teach you. You have a week, Mrs." Hartwell swept out of the room just as suddenly as she had entered, leaving them alone with another new challenge to face. Caleb got to his feet, walking to the middle of the room where the furniture had been moved aside to create a small, clear space. "Well," he said, holding out his hand. "Shall we?" Elena stood up on shaky legs. "Now? No time like the present, and we will need the practice if we are going to fool anyone into thinking we have ever danced together before." She put her hand in his, and he pulled her closer than he ever had before. One of his hands rested on her waist, the other held hers, leaving hardly any space between their bodies. Being this close, she could see the tiny flecks of gold in his dark eyes. She could smell the scent of cedar and leather that always seemed to be on him. She could feel the solid warmth of his body. "Just relax," he murmured. "I will not let you fall. That is not what I'm afraid of," The words just tumbled out before she could catch them. His eyes searched hers for a moment, full of questions, but he let it go. Instead, he started humming an old waltz, guiding her through the steps with a grace that took her by surprise. At first, she was all thumbs, stepping all over his feet and whispering sorry over and over. But he was as patient as a saint. He just adjusted his own steps to match hers, holding her steady whenever she wobbled. "You're thinking too hard," he said after she nearly tripped for the third time. "Stop counting and just follow my lead. Trust me. Trust. Such a little word for such a big thing." But Elena squeezed her eyes shut, let herself melt into the sound of his humming, the sure feel of his hands, and the solid wall of his chest. And slowly, like some kind of miracle, they started to move as one. Not perfect, mind you, but together. Her feet finally found the rhythm. Her body learned to guess his next move. And when she opened her eyes again, they were really and truly dancing. "There now," Caleb said softly, and his voice had a new sound, all rough and warm. "See? You can do it." After that, they practiced every single evening. Sometimes Mrs. Hartwell would play some real music on the piano, but other times it was just the two of them in the library, with only Caleb's humming to dance to. With every lesson, the space between them got a little bit smaller. Elena's hand might wander from his shoulder to the back of his neck. His fingers would spread a little wider at her waist, pulling her just a hair closer. They quit talking during the dances, letting the steps and the tune say it all. And Elena started to live for those stolen minutes when she had to touch him, when being close was part of the deal, when she could pretend the basita pounding in her chest was just from the exercise. The night before the Henderson dance, they practiced later than usual. Mrs. Hartwell had gone to bed early with a headache, leaving them all by themselves in the library. Rain was beating a tattoo against the window panes, and thunder rumbled way off in the distance like a low growl of warning. "One more time," Caleb said, even though they had already danced their way through a dozen songs. "I just want to be sure you are comfortable." "I am comfortable," Elena said. But she stepped right back into his arms anyway, because she was a plain fool, and she would take any excuse she could get to be near him. They moved in silence, with the rain for their music and a flash of lightning for their light every now and then. Elena's dress swirled and danced around her legs. Caleb's hands were warm and sure on her, and somewhere in the middle of that waltz, something just snapped. Some invisible line got crossed, and neither one of them meant for it to happen. His hand slid higher up her back, pulling her body flush against his. Her fingers clenched in his, no longer just following his lead, but holding on for dear life. Their feet moved like they were one person now, their bodies pressed together from chest to thigh, and Elena could feel his heart hammering just as fast as her own. The humming in Caleb's throat just stopped. They stood there, stock still, but they did not step away from each other. "Elena," he said, and her name sounded like a warning. "I know," she whispered back. "The contract, the rule. No feelings. No feelings," he agreed. But his hand was still right there on her waist, and his eyes were dark with something that looked a whole lot different than not caring. "We ought to stop," Elena said. "We ought to," Caleb agreed. But neither one of them moved an inch. The rain came down harder, drumming against the house like it was trying to bust its way inside. The thunder cracked right overhead now, shaking the windows in their frames. In the flickering firelight, with storm shadows dancing all over the walls, Elena made a choice that was going to change every single thing. She went up on her toes, and she kissed him. It was only supposed to be for a second, a moment of pure weakness, something she could regret and forget about right away. But the instant her lips met his, Caleb made a low sound deep in his throat and kissed her back like a man who'd found water after wandering in the desert for 40 days. His hand balled up the fabric of her dress. Her fingers got all tangled in his hair, and the careful wall they had kept between them for weeks just shattered into a million pieces. Caleb was the one who pulled back first, breathing hard, his face a mix of pure want and something that looked a lot like panic. "We cannot," he said, his voice all rough. "Elena, we had an agreement." "I know what we agreed on," she said, her own breath coming in ragged gasps. "And I am breaking the agreement. I am breaking the rule." She reached up and touched his face, feeling the tight knot in his jaw. "I have feelings, Caleb. I have had them for weeks, and I am just so tired of pretending that I do not." "Do not," he said. But it sounded more like he was begging. "Do not do this. Do not give me something I have no right to keep." "Who says you cannot keep it?" "I do." He took a step back, and you could see it took every bit of strength he had to put that space between them. "I am not built for this, Elena. Whatever you think you are feeling, whatever I might be feeling, it does not matter. I told you what happened with Catherine. I cannot go through that again. I will not survive it." "I am not Catherine," Elena said, real quiet. "I know." He let out a bitter laugh. "That is what makes this so much worse. You are nothing like her. You are kind, and you are brave, and you always look for the good in folks, even when they have not earned it. You make me want things I gave up on wanting a long, long time ago." He ran both of his hands through his hair, messing up the perfect way he kept it. "But wanting something does not change who I am. I am still that cold, hard man she said I was. I am still someone who will let you down in the end, fail you, and make you wish you had never set foot in this house. That is not true." "It is true," he said, and he sounded so sure of it that it was like a punch to the gut. "I have proven it time and time again. Every woman I have ever been with, every friend I have ever tried to keep, they all end up the same way. They finally realize I am not worth the trouble it takes to care about me." Elena felt hot tears burning behind her eyes, but she would not let them fall. "You are wrong. You are so wrong about yourself, it just breaks my heart." "Then I guess we are both broken," Caleb said. "Because I cannot be the man you need, and you cannot be the woman I swore I would never want again." He walked toward the door, then stopped without turning around. "Get some sleep. The dance is tomorrow, and we still have a whole town to convince that we are happily married." He left her standing all alone in the library, the feel of his kiss still burning on her lips, her heart cracking wide open, just like the stormy sky outside. Elena sank down into the nearest chair, clapping a hand over her mouth to keep from crying out. She had known the rules. She had agreed to them. She had even signed her name to them. She had promised herself she would not be stupid enough to fall for a man who told her straight out that he could not love her back. But somewhere between the first gentle touch and that last desperate kiss, she had lost the line between the woman she was pretending to be and the woman she was turning into. She had fallen in love with Caleb Hartwell, not the part he was playing, but the real man underneath. The man who worked himself to the bone, taking care of his land and his people. The one who read poetry when he thought nobody was looking. The one who had held her so carefully while he taught her how to dance, like she was something precious that might break. And now she had to figure out how to get through the rest of their deal, knowing he was never going to love her back. The Henderson dance was every bit as bad as Elena had feared, and then some. The house was lit up like a star against the dark autumn night, with music pouring out of the open windows. A long line of carriages kept pulling up, dropping off folks in their Sunday best. Elena was wearing a new dress, a deep burgundy silk that Mrs. Hartwell had found somewhere, with little black beads that sparkled when she moved. Her hair was all done up in fancy curls with pearl combs holding it in place. She looked like she belonged with all these fine people. She felt like a little girl playing dress-up in her mama's clothes. "You look stunning," Caleb said when she came down the stairs, and his voice was all business, like last night had never even happened. "Thank you," Elena said back, just as formal as him. They rode over to the Henderson Ranch in a strange and heavy silence. The space between them on the carriage seat felt wider than the whole state of Texas. Caleb kept his hands to himself and his eyes on the road ahead, his face a perfect blank mask. The only thing that gave him away was the white-knuckle grip he had on the reins. "Caleb," Elena started to say, needing to do something, anything, to break the awful quiet between them. "Not now," he said softly. "Please, I cannot. Not now." So, they got to the dance without another word and slipped right into their parts like they had been doing it their whole lives. Caleb's hand found the small of her back. Elena smiled and said hello to the guests. They moved through the big crowd like they were one person, all polished and perfect on the outside, with nothing but a big, aching hollowness on the inside. The dancing started about an hour later. Couples began to twirl across the Henderson's grand ballroom floor to a real live orchestra that played a whole lot better than Mrs. Hartwell's piano. Caleb led Elena out for the first waltz, and her fool body just lit up the second he touched her. Her pulse started racing, her breath got short, and every nerve she had was suddenly wide awake. "Just like we practiced," he murmured, guiding her into the steps they had gone over 100 times. But it was not like when they practiced. Those dances had been building up to something, with each one pulling them just a little bit closer. These steps were careful and measured, keeping just the right amount of distance between them, like that little bit of air was the only thing keeping them from falling apart. "You are doing real well," Caleb said, his voice low enough for only her to hear. "I have a good partner." His hand tightened just a tiny bit at her waist. "Elena, I know," she said quickly. "I know. You do not need to say it again. I understand." She made herself look him right in the eye to show him she meant it. "We will get through this year. We will honor the contract, and then we will both walk away, just like we planned." A look that might have been pain flashed across his face, but it was gone so fast she thought she might have imagined it. "Thank you," he said, "for understanding, for not making this any harder than it has to be." The music stopped. They moved apart with all the proper reluctance just for show, and Elena found herself pulled into conversations with the other women, while Caleb talked about cattle prices and water rights with the men. It was all polite and proper, exactly what their business deal called for. It felt like she was slowly draining away drop by drop. The hours went by in a haze of fake smiles and empty chatter. Elena danced with other men, local ranchers, some of Morrison's business partners, who were no doubt reporting everything back to him. She even danced with James Hartwell, who looked at her with far too much understanding in his eyes. "He is a damn fool," James said as they stepped through a country dance. "My brother. I mean, whatever it was that happened between you two, he is handling it like a fool." "Nothing happened," Elena said, the words coming out automatically. "Right. And I am the King of England." James spun her around with skill. "For whatever it is worth, I have never seen him look at any woman the way he looks at you. Not even Catherine, and we all figured he would die when she left him." "He looks at me like I am a business deal," Elena said, unable to hide the sharp edge in her voice. "He looks at you like you are the sun itself, and he is just plain terrified of getting burned," James corrected. "There is a difference." Before Elena could think of a reply, the band started up another waltz, and Caleb was suddenly right at her elbow, with tension rolling off of him like heat from the pavement. Cutting in, he said to his brother, not wasting any words. James stepped away with a smile that knew too much. "She is all yours, brother." Caleb pulled Elena into his arms with less gentleness than he had shown all evening, his grip tight enough to feel possessive. They moved across the floor without a word, but something had changed. That polite space they had kept between them was gone, replaced by an almost closeness that was so aggressive it nearly stole her breath. "What did James say to you?" Caleb demanded, his voice low and threatening. "Nothing that matters. Do not lie to me." Elena looked straight up at him and saw the tight control in his face that couldn't quite cover the fire burning underneath. He said, "You are a fool, and that you look at me like I am the sun." Caleb's jaw tightened. "He talks too much. Does he? Or does he just say the things you don't want to admit?" "Elena." "No," she cut him off. "You do not get to shut me out again. You kissed me back last night, Caleb. You kissed me like a man dying of thirst who just found water. So do not stand there and act like you feel nothing at all." "What I feel does not matter," he said harshly. "What I feel has no bearing on what I can actually offer you. And what if I do not need you to offer me anything but the plain truth?" She kept her voice down, aware of the other dancers moving all around them. "What if the only thing I want is for you to stop hiding behind these walls you built to keep yourself from really living?" His eyes blazed with emotion. "You have no earthly idea what you are asking of me. Then tell me. Tell me what is so impossible to ask." The music began to swell, reaching its peak. Caleb pulled her in even tighter, his lips close to her ear, and spoke words that felt like a sharp knife. "You are asking me to believe that I deserve to be loved, and I cannot do it. I have tried, Elena. For weeks, I have tried to make myself think that maybe, just maybe, this time could be different. That maybe you are right, and I am not the cold, broken man Catherine said I was. But I cannot drown out that voice that keeps telling me I will eventually let you down, just like I have let down everyone else. That voice is louder than any song, any kiss, any—" A moment where he felt something besides emptiness. That confession shattered something deep inside Elena's heart. She stopped dancing right there, which made him stop too. She looked right up at him, tears finally streaming down her face without any effort to hide them. "Then you are not just protecting yourself," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "You are protecting me from the pain of loving a man who refuses to see he is worth loving. And that is the most hurtful thing you could possibly do." Before he could even think of a reply, the song ended. A wave of polite applause washed over the ballroom. Elena slipped from his embrace and turned away. She headed for the wide porch, hoping the cold night air would clear her thoughts where no one could watch her fall apart. She found a hidden spot behind a lattice of withered roses and just let the sobs come. She was so angry with herself for breaking the one promise she had made. She knew better. She had been warned plain as day, and yet she was foolish enough to fall for a man who told her from the start why he could never love her back. Elena. She spun around to see Caleb standing just a few feet away. His face was filled with a raw emotion she had never seen on him before. It was a true and open vulnerability. "Please go away," she whispered. "I cannot handle this right now. I cannot just leave you out here crying." He stepped toward her, and she noticed his hands were trembling. "Elena, I am so sorry. I am sorry for causing you this pain. I am sorry for being the very man Catherine claimed I was. I am sorry for—" "Stop," Elena said with a sudden fire in her voice. "Stop saying you are sorry for being hurt. Stop blaming yourself for what she did to you. Catherine was wrong, Caleb. She was a cruel and bitter woman. And you have spent 6 long years believing her lies, because that was easier than opening your heart to someone again." "It is not easier," he said, his voice cracking with emotion. "It is pure agony. Every single morning, wake up knowing you are right down the hall from me, knowing you are playing the part of my wife, while I have to pretend I do not want you to be my real wife. It is a special kind of torture, Elena, but it feels safer than what she wanted from me." "Safer than letting yourself be happy," Elena corrected him gently. "Safer than taking a leap of faith that maybe, just maybe, I was telling the truth when I said I had feelings for you. Safer than watching you finally realize I am not worth loving," he confessed. The raw fear in his voice made her heart break all over again. Safer than seeing that day come when you look at me the same way she did, with nothing but disappointment and regret and relief that you are finally getting away from me. Elena closed the space between them. She reached up and cradled his face in her hands, making him look her straight in the eye. "I am not Catherine," she said, her voice strong and clear. "And you are not the man she made you believe you are. You are an honorable, kind man, and you feel things so deeply that you have taught yourself not to feel anything at all, because the pain is just too much to bear. But I see you, Caleb. I see the real man underneath all that armor you have built around your heart. And I love you anyway." He flinched as if she had physically hit him. "Do not." "I love you," she said again, her voice even stronger this time. "I love the way you go out to check on your cattle every single morning before the sun even thinks about rising. I love how you remember every ranch hand's name and always ask about their kids. I love that you read old poetry books when you think no one is looking and that you cannot sing a note. But you hum whenever we dance. I love that you are trying so hard to shield me from yourself that you would rather shatter both our hearts than take a chance on being hurt again. Elena, please." "I love you," she said for the third time. And this time it sounded like a battle cry. "And you can spend the entire rest of this year pushing me away if you want. And you can stand there and watch me leave when our time is up, just like we planned. But you cannot stop me from loving you. That old dog will not hunt. So you can either accept it and let yourself love me back, or you can at least have the decency to admit that you are just too darn scared to even try." Those words hung in the air between them like a challenge. Caleb just stared at her, his chest rising and falling heavily, all his careful self-control finally cracking apart. She saw it happen right before her eyes. She saw the walls crumble, the armor break, and saw all the feelings he had kept locked away flood into his expression. "I am terrified," he admitted, his voice rough with emotion. "I am absolutely terrified of this, of you, of everything I feel whenever you so much as walk into a room. I am terrified that I will wake up one morning and you will have finally figured out what Catherine always knew, that I'm missing some vital piece inside me, something that makes other people capable of a love that lasts." "You are not missing a single thing," Elena said. "You have just convinced yourself that you are, and that is not the same thing at all." "How do you know?" The question was a desperate plea. "How can you possibly be sure I will not hurt you?" "I do not know for sure," she answered plainly. "That is what makes this love and not just some business deal. It is about choosing to hand your heart over to someone even when there are no guarantees, even when it is the scariest thing in the world." Thunder rumbled way off in the distance, another storm rolling in across the wide-open plains. The wind began to pick up, sending a flurry of dried rose petals dancing across the stone porch. And in that very moment, with the faint sound of music drifting out from the ballroom, and the first drops of rain starting to hit the ground, Caleb made a choice. He kissed her. Not a careful kiss this time, not one with measured control or professional distance. He kissed her like a drowning man who had finally found air. His hands cupped her face, his body pressed firmly against hers, and Elena felt him give in completely. She felt the walls finally come crashing down. The fear was washed away by something much stronger and more honest. When they finally pulled apart, both of them breathing heavily, Caleb rested his forehead against hers. "I love you," he said. The words came out rough, but they were real. "Heaven help me, Elena. I have been falling in love with you since the day you signed that blasted contract. Maybe even before then. Back when you stood in my ballroom in that old, worn-out coat and refused to let anyone make you feel small." A powerful joy erupted in Elena's chest, feeling bright and sharp. "Say it again. I love you." He kissed her temple, her cheekbone, and the corner of her lips. "I love you, and I'm scared to death. And I have no earthly idea how to do this without a safety net of rules and agreements. but I am willing to try if you are." "I am willing," Elena said, laughing right through her tears. "I have been willing for weeks, you stubborn, stubborn man." He kissed her again, slower this time, a deep and possessive kiss. His hand slid down to the small of her back, pulling her even closer, and Elena felt all the tension that had been between them for weeks melt away and turn into something new, something that could last, something real. "We should probably head back inside," Caleb murmured against her lips, "before folks start to notice we are gone." "Let them notice," Elena said with a sudden boldness. "Let them all see that we are a real married couple, that we are truly in love. No more pretending." He pulled back just enough to look down at her, his face a mixture of wonder and leftover fear. "What about the contract, the agreement?" "Tear it up," Elena said. "I do not want your money or your little shop or any of the things we settled on. I just want you, the real you, not the man you have been pretending to be." "You will have me," he promised her. "All of me, even the parts I think are broken. Especially the broken parts, because you are the only one who has ever made me believe they might not be so broken after all." They stood there together in the light rain, holding on to each other as the storm grew stronger. Elena thought about all the rules and contracts and the careful space they had kept between them for weeks. She thought about how sometimes you need walls to feel safe, but you need doors to truly live. Caleb had finally opened his, and Elena was walking right on through without a second thought. She was choosing love over being safe, choosing him over every single sensible reason her practical mind could come up with. It was a reckless choice. It was a terrifying choice. It was exactly the right choice. When they walked back into the ballroom, soaked from the rain and holding hands tightly, everyone could see the change. Something huge had shifted between them, turning a performance into the honest-to-goodness truth. The whispers started up right away, people wondering what could have happened out on that porch, wondering why Caleb Hartwell was now looking at his wife like she held the answers to questions he had given up on asking years ago. Let them whisper, Elena thought. Let them all wonder. She was done hiding how she felt, done acting like their marriage was anything other than the most real and important thing in her life. They shared one more dance before it was time to leave. And this dance was completely different from all the others. There was no measured distance, no careful acting, just two people moving as one, finally being honest about the love that was between them. "What happens now?" Elena asked as they swayed to the music. "I do not know," Caleb admitted. "But we will figure it out together. No more contracts." "No more contracts," he agreed. "Just us, just this." Just love, Elena thought to herself. Complicated and scary and worth every single risk. The rule was broken, and neither of them had ever been happier about breaking something in their entire lives. That happiness lasted for exactly 3 days. 3 whole days of waking up with Caleb's arms wrapped around her, of sharing coffee in the morning with real smiles instead of polite performances, of dancing in the library in the middle of the day just because they felt like it, not because they had to practice. 3 days of Elena starting to believe that maybe love really was enough, that tearing down the walls was the hard part, and that everything that came after would be smooth sailing. She should have known better. The first sign of trouble showed up at breakfast on the 4th morning. Caleb was reading the territorial newspaper, and his face got darker and darker with every line. All of a sudden, he slammed the paper down on the table so hard that the coffee cups rattled in their saucers. "That son of a—" He stopped himself, glancing quickly at his mother and then at Elena. "Pardon me, but Morrison has really outdone himself this time." "What is it, dear?" Mrs. Hartwell asked, her voice calm but suggesting she already had an idea. "He has filed a formal complaint with the territorial court. He is demanding an investigation into fraudulent marriage claims. He says he has proof that our marriage license was backdated, that we paid off county officials, that this whole thing is a scheme to defraud the Fairfax family." Caleb's jaw was clenched so tight Elena could see the muscle twitching. "He is asking the court to declare our marriage void and to charge both of us with fraud." Elena felt her stomach plummet. Can he do that? He can sure as heck try, Caleb said, his voice grim. And if he gets the right judge, the right political pressure him, he just might pull it off. Morrison has folks in his pocket all over this territory. He's been laying this trap since our engagement party. Mrs. Hartwell placed her teacup on its saucer without a sound. Then we will put up a fight. We can hire the finest lawyers. We are going to lose, Caleb cut in, because he is telling the truth, Mother. That license was dated wrong on purpose. Those witnesses took our money. Every single thing he is accusing us of is exactly what we did. He glanced at Elena, and she could see the pure fear churning under his anger. If this thing goes to a courtroom, Elena could be looking at criminal charges, jail time. She cannot have her name dragged through the mud all over this territory. Then we will tell people what really happened, Elena said, her voice sounding much braver than she felt. We will make them understand why we did it, that it was to protect you from a marriage you never wanted, that nobody was actually hurt by it. The truth just buries us deeper, Caleb stated plainly. The truth is we planned to commit fraud, used fake papers, and lied to this entire community. The fact that we fell in love later on does not change what we did to start with. His words just hung there in the quiet room, thick and heavy. A chill worked its way into Elena's bones, even with the warm morning light pouring through the glass. What are you trying to say? She asked softly. Caleb got up and paced to the window, his back ramrod straight with tension. I am saying I made a terrible, terrible mistake. I figured I could outplay Morrison. I thought I could hold on to this ranch and my own life with one clever deception. Instead, I have put you right in the path of danger. You who had no part in any of these games, who just came here looking for honest work. He pressed his hand flat against the cool window pane. I have destroyed you to save my own hide, and I cannot live with that. Caleb, do not say that. He turned to face her, his expression so blank and unreadable it made Elena's heart skip a beat. She recognized that look. He was shutting her out. I have to think. I need to find a way to clean up this mess without pulling you down into it with me. He walked out without saying anything else, leaving his breakfast on the plate and his coffee to grow cold. Mrs. Hartwell's hand reached across the table and gently covered Elena's. Just give him some time, she said in a quiet voice. When Caleb gets scared, he runs for cover. It is how he has gotten through everything this life has thrown at him. I am not Catherine, Elena said, her voice cracking. I will not walk away from him just because the trail gets rough. I know that, dear, but does he? That question followed Elena all through the long day. Caleb was not there for lunch. He never showed up for supper. She finally located him long after the sun went down, out in the barn, sitting on a bale of hay and just staring into the dark. A half-gone bottle of whiskey sat on the floor next to him. Drinking by yourself, she said quietly, just to let him know she was there. That is not like you. Maybe you do not know me as well as you think you do. His words were clear, not slurred, but they were heavy with too much whiskey and not enough hope. Elena sat down near him, careful not to touch, leaving him his space. Tell me what is on your mind. I am thinking I should have just let Morrison marry me off to Margaret. It would have been simpler, a whole lot safer. Nobody would have gotten hurt but me, and I am used to getting hurt. He took another long swallow. But instead, I pulled you right into my disaster, made you a partner in my lies, and now you are the one facing jail time because I was too much of a coward to face my own life. That is not how it happened, is it? He finally looked at her then, and his eyes were completely empty. I saw you standing in that ballroom, looking so vulnerable and lost, and I used you. I told myself I was helping us both, but the truth is I just grabbed for the quickest way out and did not care what it would cost you. I am a grown woman, Caleb. I made my own decision, Elena said, her voice firm. I knew what the dangers were. I signed that paper with my eyes wide open. You signed it because your back was against the wall, because you had debts you could not handle, and a sister who counted on you and nowhere else to go. His laugh was a bitter sound. I used that desperation. I wrapped it up and called it a business deal, and I made myself believe I was being a good man. But I was not. I was just being selfish. A hot anger started to push through Elena's fear. So, what is your plan now? To push me away? To build those walls back up even higher than before? To prove Catherine was right about you all along by becoming that cold, shut-down man she always said you were? My plan is to protect you from what I have done. He put the whiskey bottle down with slow, deliberate care. Morrison's lawyer paid a visit this afternoon while you were out on your ride. He made me an offer. A cold fear began to settle deep in Elena's belly. What kind of offer? If I agree to end the marriage, tell everyone publicly that it was a fraud, and take all the penalties, which includes some heavy fines and limits on my business. Then Morrison will drop every charge against you. Your name will be untouched. You will walk away from all this with the money I already gave you and a clean slate. And you? I will be ruined, Caleb said, his voice flat. My reputation gone, the business crippled. I will probably have to sell off a good piece of the ranch to pay all the fines, but you will be safe. That is all that matters. No! Elena shot to her feet, her hands balled into tight fists. Not a chance in hell. We are going to fight this together. There is no together, Caleb said, and his voice was so devoid of all feeling, so empty that it stole the air from her lungs. There is you, with your entire life still in front of you, and there is me, paying for the messes I made. That is how this story ends. That is the ending you are picking, Elena corrected him, her heart tearing between fury and sorrow. You are the one choosing to give up, choosing to believe you are not good enough for happiness, choosing to shove away the only person who loves you, because taking that love would mean finding a courage you do not think you possess. He flinched at her words but did not try to argue. 3 days ago, you told me that you loved me, Elena went on, her voice trembling. You kissed me right out in the rain and you promised me we would figure this all out as a team. Was any of that real? Or do you really just run that fast when things get hard? This is not me running, Caleb said quietly. This is me facing facts. I made a mistake when I fell in love with you, Elena. Not because you are not worth loving. You are worth more than I will ever have a right to. But because loving me has put you in harm's way. The kindest thing I can do for you now is to let you go before Morrison tears you apart. The kindest thing you could do is to trust me to make my own choices about the risks I am willing to take. Elena's hands were shaking now. Her whole body was quivering with more emotion than she could hold inside. But you cannot do that, can you? Because to trust me, you would have to believe that I might actually choose to stay. And you are so sure that you are not worth loving, that you will burn down anything good in your life just to prove yourself right. Maybe so, he said, getting to his feet to face her. Maybe I am just that busted up inside. But broken or not, I will not let Morrison destroy you just so he can punish me. Tomorrow, I am signing the papers. The marriage will be over. You will get everything we first agreed to, plus some extra money for all the emotional trouble I have caused you. I do not want your damn money, Elena cried, tears now pouring down her cheeks. I want you. I want us. I want the life we were starting to build. If you would just stop being so terrified of being happy, then you want something I do not have to give you. His face was like it was carved out of stone. Every last bit of the man she loved was locked away behind walls that suddenly felt 1,000 feet high. I am sorry, Elena. I truly am. But this is the only way it can end. He walked right past her and out of the barn, leaving her all alone in the growing dark, with nothing but the smell of hay and horses and the sound of her own heart shattering. Elena collapsed back onto the hay bale, buried her face in her hands, and just let the tears come. For 3 wonderful days, she had put her faith in second chances. She had believed that love could mend old hurts, that being brave instead of being scared truly mattered. But Caleb was picking fear. He was choosing to believe Morrison's empty threats instead of her heartfelt promises. He was choosing to save her from dangers she was more than willing to face, as long as she could do it standing beside him. She had told him she was not Catherine, but he was treating her just the same, so sure that she would leave him in the end. So, he was leaving her first, making it a clean break, making it hurt, making absolutely sure that he would never have to feel the pain of being left behind ever again. The cruelest part of it all was that she understood why. Elena could see the twisted logic that made perfect sense inside his scarred heart. She saw how every painful thing in his life had taught him that love never lasts, that people always go, that trusting your happiness to another person was just setting yourself up to be disappointed. She understood him completely. She just refused to accept it. Elena wiped at her tears with unsteady hands, and walked back toward the house. Mrs. Hartwell was in the kitchen waiting for her, a knowing look on her face. "He told you," she stated. It was not a question. "He told me he is giving up," Elena clarified. "He is signing Morrison's agreement, ending our marriage, and giving up everything just to keep me safe from trouble I am perfectly willing to face." Mrs. Hartwell let out a long, heavy sigh, and in that moment she looked all of her 60 years. That boy, that stubborn, self-sabotaging boy. She pulled a chair out from the table, motioning for Elena to sit down. "Let me tell you a little something about my son. His father, my husband, was a hard man. He was not mean, but he was demanding. He expected Caleb to be tough, quiet, and impossible to rattle. When Caleb was 8 years old, his favorite horse broke its leg. He cried, of course, and his father punished him for it. Said that real men do not cry over animals. That sort of weakness gets a man killed out here on the frontier." She poured them both some tea with perfectly steady hands. From that day on, Caleb learned to bury every single thing he felt. He became the perfect son, the perfect rancher, the perfect man. And when Catherine broke his heart, it just proved what he had always thought was true. That showing you are vulnerable, needing another person, letting yourself feel anything too strong, it all just leads to heartache. "So now he is choosing the pain he can control," Elena said. "Exactly. And I just do not know how to get through to him anymore." Mrs. Hartwell's voice started to tremble. "I have watched him empty himself out for years, watched him just get by instead of truly living. And just when I started to think you might be the one to bring him back," she just shook her head. "Morrison knew precisely what he was doing. He knew that threatening you was the one thing that would make Caleb fold. It is not about the ranch or the money or even his good name. It is about making Caleb push away the people he cares about before they have a chance to hurt him." "Then Morrison gets his way," Elena said, the bitterness sharp in her voice. "Unless you stand and fight for him." Elena's head snapped up. "He does not want me to fight. He wants me to take the easy way out and just walk away." "He wants you to prove him right," Mrs. Hartwell corrected her gently. "He wants you to leave him, just like Catherine did, so he can tell himself he was right all along, that it was never going to last. But what if you do not give him that satisfaction? What if you stay right here and fight, not just for him, but for the both of you?" "How? He has already made up his mind." "Then you will have to change it." Mrs. Hartwell reached out across the table and took Elena's hands in her own. "You love my son. I have seen it in how you look at him. I have seen how you have been so gently and carefully helping him learn how to feel again. Do not you give up on him now. Not when he needs you more than ever, even if he is too blind and too scared to admit it." Elena wanted to. Every part of her wanted to fight for Caleb, for them, and for the life she knew they could have together. But she was just so weary of fighting, weary of having to be the brave one, weary of loving a man who seemed dead set on pushing her away for what he thought was her own good. "I do not know if I am strong enough," she whispered. "You are more than strong enough," Mrs. Hartwell said with complete conviction. "You lived through being poor, through loss and hardship. And you came out on the other side still able to love with an open heart. You are exactly strong enough. The real question is, do you believe you deserve to fight for your own happiness? Those words hit her like a bolt of lightning. Elena had spent all this time wondering if Caleb thought he deserved to be loved, but she had never once stopped to ask if she believed she deserved to be loved right back. If she believed her happiness, she knew, was something you had to fight for, even when the man she loved was the one pushing her away with both hands. What in the world am I supposed to do, Elena asked herself. Tomorrow morning, Caleb was meeting Morrison's lawyer to sign that awful agreement. That meant she had until sunrise to either change his stubborn mind or accept his choice and walk away for good. The older woman squeezed her hands one last time, her touch warm and firm. But Elena, honey, if you do decide to leave, you make sure it is your choice, not because he talked you into believing you were not worth the fight. Elena passed a long, sleepless night, her heart torn between a burning anger and a deep, aching sadness. She rehearsed entire speeches in her head only to discard them, trying to figure out how to reach a man who had locked himself behind walls built from years of hurt and disappointment. When the sun finally started to rise, she still did not have a perfect plan, but she was crystal clear on one thing. She would be damned if she let Caleb make this kind of decision for the both of them without her having a final say. She found him in his study at first light, already dressed in a formal suit with papers spread all over his desk. He looked up as she entered, and for a fleeting moment, something like relief softened his face before he quickly hid it away. "Elena, I figured you would still be sleeping. I could not sleep a wink knowing you were about to make the biggest mistake of your entire life," she said, closing the door firmly behind her. "You and I need to have a talk. There is nothing left to say. I am meeting Morrison's lawyer at 8. The decision has been made." "Your decision, Caleb," Elena corrected him sharply. "Not ours. You are deciding my future without even bothering to ask what I want." "I know exactly what you want," Caleb said, his voice thick with weariness. "You want us to fight Morrison together, to face whatever comes, and to stand against the whole world side by side. It is—" "That sounds romantic and brave. It also sounds naive as all get out." "What is so naive about two people telling a bully he cannot run their lives? What is naive is thinking love is enough to win every battle," he said. He sounded so dog-tired that the anger just drained right out of Elena. Morrison has power, money, and politicians in his back pocket. He has judges who owe him favors and lawyers who will have us hogtied in court for years. Even if we fight this and somehow come out on top, it will cost us everything. The lawyer bills, the lost business, years of stress and worry. And through it all, you would be stuck with me, unable to get on with your life, just watching me get slowly crushed by a mess I made." "You are not giving me enough credit for knowing what I am getting into," Elena said. "I am giving you a chance to get out of it." Caleb stood up and walked around the desk to stand right in front of her. "Elena, I love you." "I meant every word of that, but love does not change the facts. The fact is, my own plans put you in harm's way. The fact is, Morrison will ruin you just to spite me unless I give him what he wants. And the fact is, letting you go right now while you still have a future is the most loving thing I can do. The most loving thing you can do is trust me," Elena said, her voice full of desperation. "Trust that I know the risks. Trust that I am strong enough to handle whatever comes our way. Trust that I love you enough to stay, even when it is hard." "I cannot," he said plainly, and the simple honesty of those two words shattered her heart. "I cannot trust that you will stay, because in the end, everyone leaves." Catherine left. "My father passed on and left me with more responsibility than any 19-year-old boy ought to carry. Friends I thought had my back took Morrison's side when it was the easier thing to do. I have learned that people are loyal right up until it costs them something, and then they are gone. I cannot watch you realize that loving me costs too much and see that moment you decide to walk away." "So you are leaving first," Elena said, with tears rolling down her cheeks. "You are making the choice to stay by pushing me out the door before I even get a chance to prove you wrong." "I am setting you free." Caleb corrected, though his own voice was thick with emotion. Before it is too late. Before Morrison destroys you. Before you throw away years of your life on a man who is too broken to ever give you the simple, happy love you deserve. Elena looked at the man she loved. She saw the tears he was trying so hard to hold back. She saw how his hand trembled as he stood there, trying to be strong enough to send her away. And she knew then that no argument was going to change his mind, no speech would convince him. He had already decided how this had to go, and his stubborn, self-sabotaging sense of honor would not let him see any other way. "You are right," she said softly, and saw the shock register on his face. "What?" "You are right. You are too broken to give me a simple kind of love. You are too scared to trust that I might actually be here for good. You are so convinced that you are not worthy that you cannot accept someone might love you, flaws and all." She stepped closer, putting her hand right over his heart. "But here is what you are wrong about. I do not want a simple love. I do not want a man who has never been broken. I want you, scared and flawed and convinced you are going to fail me. I want you fighting through that fear to choose love anyway. I want you to trust me, even when it scares you to death. That is what real love is, Caleb. It is not about not being afraid, it is about having the courage to act in spite of the fear." His hand came up and covered hers, pressing it hard against his chest where she could feel his heart hammering away. "I am going to leave now," she went on, her voice holding steady even with the tears. "I am going to pack my bags and be gone before you meet with Morrison's lawyer. Not because you're making me go, but because I am choosing to. I am choosing to show you what it really feels like when someone leaves, so you will understand the difference between that and someone who is fighting to stay." She stood on her toes and kissed his cheek gently. "When you are ready to stop being a coward, when you are ready to believe that love is worth the risk, you know where to find me. But I will not wait forever, Caleb. Sooner or later, even the people who love you the most run out of chances to give." She pulled away from him and walked to the door. She paused with her hand on the knob, giving him one last chance to stop her, to choose another path, to be brave enough to fight for them. He did not say a word. Elena left the study, went up the stairs to her room, and packed her one small bag with the same old clothes she had when she first arrived months ago. She left behind the pretty dresses Mrs. Hartwell had given her. She left the pearl combs and the silk stockings. She left everything that was not hers to begin with, because she did not want a thing from this house except the man who was too afraid to let himself be loved. Mrs. Hartwell found her in the hall. "You are leaving." "I am forcing his hand," Elena said. "He needs to understand what he is choosing, what he is losing. And if he lets you walk away, then at least I will know I did everything I could." Elena gave the older woman a tight hug. "Thank you for believing I was worth fighting for, even when your own son could not." "He will come to his senses," Mrs. Hartwell said with fire in her voice. "He is stubborn, but he is not a fool. He will realize what he has lost, and he will come for you. I hope you are right." Elena picked up her bag. "But I am done hoping he will change. He has to want to change. He has to want me enough to face down his own fear." She walked down that grand staircase for the very last time, through the entry hall where this whole complicated business had started, and out the front door into the bright morning sun. The stagecoach to Denver was not leaving until afternoon, but she would walk all the way to town if she had to. Anything to be gone before Caleb signed away their marriage, their future, their one shot at happiness. Behind her, the big house stood silent. Nobody ran after her. No voice called her name. Elena just kept walking, her heart breaking a little more with every step, praying that leaving was the one thing that would finally make Caleb understand what he was too scared to fight for. Inside his study, Caleb stood by the window and watched her go. He watched her walk down that long drive with her worn-out bag and her shoulders held straight, as sure as the sunrise that he was making a terrible mistake. A part of him wanted to run after her, to beg her to stay. He wanted to be brave enough to believe that maybe, just maybe, she meant it when she said she would face any storm just to be with him. But the bigger part of him, the part that had been hurt one too many times, stayed right where it was. It let her go. It told itself this was for the best, convinced itself that he was protecting her, even as his own heart shattered into a million pieces that might never fit together again. At 8 o'clock sharp, Morrison's lawyer showed up. Caleb signed the papers with a steady hand, agreeing to terms that would cripple his business for years to come. He accepted the complete ruin of his reputation in exchange for making sure Elena was safe. The lawyer left, looking mighty pleased. Morrison had won, and Caleb just sat there in his empty study in his empty house with his empty heart, and wondered if protecting someone from yourself still counted as love when it felt a whole lot like dying. The ranch just felt wrong without her. Caleb felt it right away. The quiet at the breakfast table, the empty chair sitting across from him, the way his coffee tasted bitter, even though it was brewed the same as always. He told himself it was just a rough patch, that he would get used to it, that he had made the right choice, even if it hurt like hell. He was wrong about all of it. 3 days after Elena left, he still found himself turning to tell her something, only to remember she was not there. 5 days in, he caught himself humming that waltz they had danced to, and then stopped cold when he realized what he was doing. A whole week passed, and he had stopped sleeping altogether. He would just lie there in his bed knowing she was supposed to be right down the hall. Except she was not anymore. And that connecting door between their rooms stood wide open, like it was accusing him of something. Mrs. Hartwell watched him with a growing frustration. She finally cornered him at supper on the 8th night. "You look like you have been rode hard and put away wet," she said without any preamble. "Thank you, Mother. Your concern is deeply touching. My concern is that you are dying a little bit each day and are too stubborn to admit you made a mistake." She put her fork down with a sharp clink. "Elena is gone. You got exactly what you said you wanted. So why do you look like the chief mourner at your own funeral? I am fine. You are miserable. You have not eaten a proper meal in a week. You are running yourself ragged every day and still cannot get a wink of sleep. The ranch hands are getting mighty worried. They say your head is not in the game, that you are making mistakes you have not made in years." She leaned in close, her eyes flashing. "You kept her safe from Morrison's threats, Caleb. Good for you. Now you are both just miserable. She is up in Denver all alone with a busted heart, and you are down here tearing yourself apart pretending you do not give a damn." "I do give a damn," Caleb said, his voice low. "That is why I sent her away." "No, you sent her away because you are a coward." The word stung like a slap. Caleb's hands balled up his napkin. "Protected her from what? From loving you? From deciding to stand by your side when things got tough? From having any say in her own life?" His mother's voice was rising now, full of fire. "You did not protect her, Caleb. You made her choices for her. Exactly like Morrison tried to make your choices for you. You turned into the very man you were fighting against. That is not fair. Life is not fair, and love sure as heck is not fair either." Elena knew what she was getting into. She chose you all the same. And instead of respecting that choice, you threw it right back in her face and told her she was not strong enough to decide for herself. Mrs. Hartwell pushed her chair back and stood, her napkin drifting to the floor. "Your father would be ashamed of you, not because you fell in love, not because you made mistakes, but because you were too scared to fight for your own happiness." She left him there, all alone at that big dining table, with her words bouncing off the empty walls. Caleb just stared at his plate, the food untouched, and felt a tiny crack form deep inside his chest, a split in that thick hide he had built up for so many years. Had he really become just like Morrison, making away Elena's choice, deciding what was best for her without even asking what she wanted? He pushed back from the table and made his way to his study, the one place he could always go to clear his head. But tonight, even that safe place felt all wrong. He saw the chair where Elena had sat when they cooked up their complicated story, the desk where they had signed that contract, The spot by the fireplace where she had stood and told him she loved him, so brave and sure of herself, while he was just a mess of fear and doubt. Caleb walked over to that very spot now, leaning a hand on the cool fireplace stone, and let himself truly think about what he had done. He had told himself he was doing the right thing for Elena, being noble, giving up his own happiness to keep her safe. But standing right there, where she had offered him her whole world and he had been too afraid to take it, Caleb finally saw the truth his mother had laid bare. His big noble act was not about her at all. It was about him. Because if Elena had stayed, if they had taken on Morrison together and won, then Caleb would have had to admit he deserved to be happy. He would have had to trust that somebody could see all his faults, all his failures, all the broken pieces of him and choose to love him anyway. He would have had to risk getting his heart broken all over again, knowing it had nearly destroyed him once before. It was just easier, safer, to push her away, to call it a sacrifice when it was really just plain fear. Catherine had been wrong about a lot of things, but she had been right about one. Caleb was set in his ways. He held himself to a standard no man could meet. Never let himself off the hook for a single mistake, and built his walls so high that even the people who wanted to love him could not find a way to get through. He had spent 6 years proving her right, becoming the cold, hard man she always said he was. And then Elena just walked right into his life. Elena, who saw straight through those walls to the lonely, frightened man hiding inside, who dared him to be brave, to feel something, to trust someone, who loved him not in spite of all his broken pieces, but because she understood them, because she had her own scars and knew that even something shattered could still be worth keeping. He had everything he had secretly wished for all those years, and he had tossed it aside because taking it would have taken more nerve than he thought he had. The weight of it all just buckled his knees, and he sank right down to the floor, his back against the fireplace. He had been a coward. His mother was right. Elena was right. He had picked being safe over being happy, chosen an empty life over the terrifying chance of a full one, and now she was gone. Thinking he did not love her enough to stand and fight for her, thinking she was not worth the trouble, thinking she was just one more person he would eventually push away because letting anybody in was just too much of a risk. He had done the exact same thing Catherine had done. He had made Elena feel like she was not enough, not worth the effort, not worth fighting for. The thought churned his stomach. Caleb had no idea how long he sat there on his study floor, battling demons he had ignored for too long, but after a while the powerful need to fix what he had broken finally got him back on his feet. He went to his desk, pulled out a pen and paper with hands that trembled, and just started to write. It was not a business letter, not carefully chosen words meant to keep his distance, just the plain, ugly truth that spilled out onto the page with the desperation of a man who finally realized what he was about to lose forever. He wrote about his fear, about Catherine's betrayal, and how it had made him believe he was not built for loving. He wrote about building walls to keep the hurt out, only to see too late that he had also locked himself inside with the pain. He wrote about meeting Elena and how she had walked right through his defenses like they were nothing at all. He wrote about falling in love even though it scared him to death, about those 3 perfect days when he had let himself think that maybe happiness was for him after all. He wrote about the morning Morrison's threat gave him the perfect excuse to scurry back to his lonely hideout. He wrote that he finally understood he was not protecting her. He was protecting himself from ever getting hurt again. He wrote that he now saw that pushing away the woman he loved to avoid pain had hurt a hell of a lot more than just taking the chance would have. And he wrote that he was sorry, so incredibly, completely sorry for making her feel like she was not enough, when the real truth was she was the whole damn world, and he had been too broken to see it. The sun was starting to peek over the horizon by the time Caleb was done. His hand was aching from writing. His eyes were burning from pure exhaustion and tears he would not let fall. But the letter was finished. It was messy and emotional, nothing like the neat letters he usually wrote, but it was completely honest. He sealed it up, wrote Elena's name on it in Denver, and then just stared at it for a long time. But a letter was not good enough. Words on a page could not fix the damage he had done. It was a start, though. No, a letter was a coward's way out. If he was really going to be brave, if he was going to fight for the woman he loved, he had to do it face to face. He needed to look her square in the eye and tell her he had been a fool. He needed to hand that choice right back to her, to walk away or to give him another chance, making sure she knew exactly what kind of broken, scared man she would be choosing. A decision took hold of him, and he was on his feet. He would ride to Denver, he would find Elena, and he would tell her every last thing he had been too scared to say before. And if she told him it was too late, that he had hurt her too much, that she could never trust him not to run again, then he would have to live with that. But damn if he would not put up a fight for her first. He was still holding the letter, getting ready to head upstairs and throw some things in a bag when his study door flew open. James was standing there breathing hard like he had run all the way, a look of pure urgency on his face. "Caleb, you have to get to town right now. I'm actually just about to head for Denver." "No, you have to get to town," James said again, cutting him off. "Morrison is serving papers on the ranch, on Mother, on every single business you work with. He is not finished trying to ruin you. He is going after everything. Everyone who has anything to do with you." A cold fear washed over Caleb. What kind of papers? Liens, injunctions, claims of business interference? He is using every dirty legal trick in the book to take this ranch. And he is doing it now while you are too torn up to see it coming. James grabbed his shoulder. "You have to get to town. Talk to our lawyer. Figure out how to fight this. If you do not move now, Morrison will own half this ranch by the end of the week." The timing was on purpose, Caleb realized. Morrison had waited until Elena was gone, until Caleb had signed that paper, until he was at his lowest point. Then he hit him right where it hurt, and he hit him hard. "Damn him," Caleb said under his breath. "So, you will come, Elib?" He looked down at the letter in his hand, and then his eyes found his brother. Going into town meant he would have to delay his trip to Denver. It meant leaving Elena waiting even longer, wondering if he would ever come for her. But if he failed to handle Morrison's latest attack, there would be no ranch to come back to, and no future he could offer Elena, even if she found it in her heart to give him another chance. "I will come," he finally said. "But James, as soon as we have this handled, I am riding straight to Denver. I do not care if it takes days, and I do not care if I have to fight Morrison from horseback the entire way there." James smiled a little. "It is about time you started fighting for something more than just simple survival." They rode into town together, arriving at the territorial courthouse by mid-morning. Their lawyer, a sharp, older man by the name of Harrison, was already there with documents laid out across a table, his face as grim as a storm cloud. "Morrison is thorough, I will give him that much," Harrison said as a greeting. "He is claiming you violated the terms of your agreement by using ranch resources for personal purposes during your fraudulent marriage. He says you owe him compensation for every single meal Elena ate, every piece of clothing she wore, every moment of your staff's time that was spent serving her. It is creative, it is petty, and it might just hold up in a court of law." "How much?" Caleb asked, his voice low. By his calculations, about $40,000. The number was simply staggering. It was not enough to bankrupt Caleb completely, but it was enough to cripple his operations for years. It was enough to force him to sell off land, dismiss good workers, and scale back everything his father had built from the ground up. "He cannot be serious," James said. "He is entirely serious, and unless you can prove the marriage was legitimate, that Elena was actually your wife and not part of some fraud scheme, he is going to win." Harrison looked at Caleb with a great deal of sympathy. "You signed an agreement admitting that the marriage was a fraud. That single admission gives Morrison everything he needs to win." Caleb sank down into a chair, the weight of his mistakes pressing down on him with a physical force. In his attempt to protect Elena, he had given Morrison the very weapon needed to destroy everything else he cared about: the ranch, his workers and their families, and his mother's security. All of it was now balanced on the edge of ruin because Caleb had been too afraid to fight back when fighting was what mattered most. "There has to be a way around this," he said, his voice rough. "There is," a voice said from the doorway. But you are not going to like it. Caleb's head snapped up. Elena stood there in the courthouse doorway, dressed in the same worn blue dress she had left in. Her hair was blown by the wind from her travels, and her expression was full of determination. "What are you doing here, Chet?" he asked, standing up so fast that his chair scraped loudly across the floor. "I am saving you from yourself," Elena said, walking into the room with the confidence of someone who had made a decision and would not be swayed from it. "Again, Elena, you cannot be here. Morrison will what? Try to destroy me? He already did that." She moved to the table, looking over Harrison's papers with a quick efficiency. "Let me guess. He is using Caleb's admission of fraud to claim damages from the ranch." "Yes," Harrison confirmed, looking between the two of them with a newfound interest. "But if you are here, if you are willing to testify that the marriage was legitimate, that might give us the grounds we need to challenge him." "I will do better than testify," Elena interrupted. She reached into her own worn bag and pulled out a document. "I brought our original contract, the one nobody knows about except for me and Caleb. It is the very paper that proves we made a business deal, one we both entered into with honest intentions, that just so happened to turn into a real marriage." Caleb just stared at her. "You kept it?" "Of course I did. I kept every last thing. Your letters, the papers showing the money you sent, even the receipts for things we bought for our arrangement." Elena looked him straight in the eye, and he could see the pure steel underneath her gentle surface. "I am a seamstress, Caleb. My entire life has been spent making things fit right, mending tears and strengthening weak seams. Did you honestly think I would not keep records of a deal worth thousands of dollars? But showing that contract will prove Morrison's case," Harrison pointed out. "It proves the marriage began as a fraud." "It proves the marriage began as a business deal," Elena corrected him, "which is completely legal. Marriages of convenience happen all the time, for citizenship, for money, for a better place in society. The law does not demand love, just legal agreement and the right paperwork." She turned back to Caleb. "We had both. We entered a deal legally. We both held up our end of the bargain, and then, completely separate from the business side of things, we fell in love. That is not fraud. That is just life." Harrison was nodding his head slowly. "She is right. If we can prove the first deal was made in good faith by both of you, that there was no plan to deceive the court or anyone else, then Morrison's claim of fraud just falls to pieces. The marriage might have started in an unusual way, but it was always legal." "But the backdated license," Caleb began to say, "that was a mistake we made because we were scared, not because we were trying to commit some malicious fraud," Elena finished for him. "We were just trying to make the paperwork line up with our reality after it had already happened. It was foolish and, yes, technically against the law, but it was not fraud meant to hurt anyone, especially since we started a real marriage right after." She looked at Harrison. "Can you work with that?" "I can absolutely work with that," Harrison said, a new excitement rising in his voice. "If Mrs. Hartwell is willing to testify, then I am willing," Elena said with resolve. "I am willing to testify and show the contract, to explain our deal to anybody who will listen. I am willing to stand up in a courtroom and tell the whole world that I married Caleb Hartwell at first for business, and I stayed married to him because of love." She turned to Caleb, and her voice became gentle. "I am willing to fight, Caleb. The real question is, are you?" Caleb could not get a word out past the lump forming in his throat. Elena was here. She was standing right in front of him, risking her good name, her safety, everything she had gained by leaving him. She was willing to fight for them, even after he had been too scared to fight for himself. "Why?" he finally managed to ask. "After everything I said to you, everything I did, why would you come back?" "Because a very wise person once told me that broken things can still be beautiful," Elena said. "And because I love you, even when you are being an idiot. In fact, especially when you are being an idiot. Because that is when you need someone to love you the most." She stepped closer, closing the space between them. "I left to make you feel what it was like to lose me, to make you understand what you were choosing. Did it work?" "It worked," Caleb said, his voice rough. He reached out for her hands. holding on to them like they were lifelines. "Elena, I was coming to get you this morning. Before James even got here, I was packing my bags to ride all the way to Denver to tell you I was sorry, that I was wrong, that I was too dang scared to fight for us, but I am not anymore." He pulled the letter from his pocket, all creased and worn now. "I wrote this for you. I was up all night trying to find the words to explain why I had been such a coward, why I pushed away the single best thing that ever happened to me." Elena took the letter, her eyes quickly reading the first few lines, and tears began to run down her face. "You were really coming for me?" "I really was. I finally understood what you were trying to tell me all along, that loving you did not mean I had to be perfect or brave. It just meant I had to show up, to choose you every single day, even when I'm scared, especially when I'm scared." He gently touched her face, wiping a tear away with his thumb. "I am still scared, Elena, still scared. To tell you the truth, I am terrified. But I am more terrified of living my life without you than I am of risking my heart again." "Good," Elena said, laughing through her tears, "because I am terrified too. But we can be terrified together." James cleared his throat with a loud cough. "This is all very touching, it really is. But we have got a legal plan to make and a fella named Morrison to ruin. Can you two save the reunion for a little later?" Elena laughed, and the sound was bright and real. "He is right. We have got work to do." They spent the next 3 hours mapping out their counterattack with Harrison's help. Elena's contract was the foundation, the proof that their deal had been made honestly with clear rules and benefits for both of them. That, combined with what Mrs. Hartwell would say about the real love that had developed, statements from ranch workers who had seen their bond grow, and the simple fact that Caleb had kept his end of the bargain, gave them a rock-solid case that their marriage was legitimate. It was as real as it gets in the eyes of the law. "Morrison bet his whole scheme on you being too heartbroken to put up a fight," Harrison explained. "He figured Caleb would stay down for the count and Elena would stay gone. With both of you here standing together and ready to tell the whole truth, it knocks the legs out from under everything he has built." "When can we file?" Caleb asked. "I can have the papers drawn up by sunup tomorrow. We will hit them with a countersuit for malicious prosecution, harassment, and meddling with your business. Let's make Morrison play defense for once instead of always being on the attack." Harrison grinned a wide grin. "This is gonna be mighty satisfying." They stepped out of the courthouse as the long afternoon shadows stretched across the town square. Caleb held tight to Elena's hand, scared that if he let her go, she would just vanish again. They walked without a word toward the spot where James had the horses hitched, the heavy silence of things unsaid hanging between them. At last, Caleb stopped and turned Elena around to look at him. "I am not worthy of you," he said softly. "Not your forgiveness, not your fighting spirit, and certainly not your love. But I am asking for all of it anyway, because for the first time I am selfish enough to want my own happiness more than I want to shield myself from pain." "You are not selfish," Elena said. "You are just a man, full of flaws and fear, and doing your best like the rest of us. You hurt me." "That you did," she agreed. "And if you do it again, if you run off the next time things get tough, I will not come back. I love you, Caleb, but I will not wear out my life chasing a man who will not plant his boots long enough to be loved." Her face was dead serious now, all the earlier lightness gone. "If we do this, if we make this marriage real in every single way, you have to give me your word you will stay. Not because it is easy, but because we are worth the hard days." "I promise," Caleb said, and he felt it in his soul. "I promise to stay, to fight, and to choose us, even when I am scared out of my mind. I promise to trust you when you tell me you love me, even when that little voice in my head says I do not deserve it. I promise to be brave enough to let my guard down, because that is what real love asks for." Elena smiled, and it was like the sun rising over the open plains. "Then we have ourselves a deal, Mr. Hartwell." "No more deals," Caleb said, drawing her in close. "No more contracts or arrangements or back and forth. Just love. Messy, hard, terrifying, beautiful love." He kissed her right then and there in the middle of town, not giving a damn who saw. He did not care about his reputation or what was proper, only the woman in his arms who had fought for him when he was too scared to fight for himself. When they finally pulled apart, James was grinning from ear to ear. "About damn time," he said. "Now can we head on home? Mama's going to be unbearable when she finds out she was right about all of this." The ride back to the ranch felt different from any trip Caleb had ever made. Elena rode with him, her back against his chest, and they talked about it all. The fears they had both been carrying, the mistakes they had made, and the life they wanted to build together. No more walls, no more careful space between them, just the plain, raw truth that felt like a fresh start. Mrs. Hartwell met them on the porch. She took one long look at their joined hands, and at Elena's tear-streaked smiling face, and said simply, "Thank the heavens. I was about to ride to Denver myself and drag you both back here to sort out this foolishness." "Your faith in us is mighty touching, Mother," Caleb said with a dry smile. "My faith is in Elena. She has more common sense in her little finger than you have in your whole stubborn head." But she pulled Caleb into a fierce hug all the same. "I am proud of you, son, for finally being brave enough to fight for your own happiness." The trial was held 3 weeks later. Morrison had thrown every legal trick he had at their countersuit, but Elena's testimony just blew his case to smithereens. She sat on the witness stand, calm and well-spoken, and laid out their arrangement with perfect clarity. Two people had made a business deal that helped them both, and then they went and fell in love for real. She showed the contract, explained every single part, and proved how both of them had honored their word in good faith. "Mr. Morrison wants you to believe we committed some kind of fraud," Elena told the judge. "But the only fraud here is his idea that love has to look one certain way to be real. My husband and I found one another in a strange situation. We built our partnership on honesty and respect, and we fell in love despite trying our best to keep it all business. That is not fraud. That is the most honest thing either one of us has ever done." The judge sided with them completely. He not only threw out Morrison's lawsuit, but ordered him to pay damages for abusing the court, and issued a formal order to stop him from any more harassment. It was a total victory. A knockout blow in public that was just so satisfying. Morrison left the courthouse looking 20 years older. His political friends were suddenly nowhere to be found, and his reputation for being untouchable was shattered. Caleb did not feel triumphant, just a deep sense of relief. The fight was done. They had won, and what mattered more, they had won it together. "What do we do now?" Elena asked as they left the courthouse, Caleb's arm wrapped around her waist with Mrs. Hartwell and James following behind. "Now?" Caleb stopped and turned to face her square on. "Now we get married, for real this time. Not some secret ceremony, not a business deal. A real wedding with our family and friends, where I can stand up tall in front of everyone who matters and promise to love you for the rest of my days." "We are already married," Elena pointed out, but she was smiling. "We have the legal paper. I want to give you a celebration. I want everyone to know that you chose me, and I'm going to spend every day for the rest of my life showing you I am worthy of that choice." He pulled her close, resting his forehead on hers. "Marry me again, Elena. This time with pure joy instead of fear. This time knowing exactly what we are promising each other." "Yes," Elena said, laughing and crying all at once. "Yes, I will marry you again as many times as you ask, in as many ways as you need, until you finally believe that I am not going anywhere." "I believe it now," Caleb said. "You fought Morrison, you fought me, you fought for us when I was too scared to do it myself. If that is not proof of forever, I do not know what is." They got married again 6 weeks later in the little white chapel where they had gone to that first awkward church social. Half the territory showed up, curious to see the couple whose unconventional love story had brought down the powerful Senator Morrison. Elena wore a dress she had sewn herself, made of ivory silk with tiny pearl buttons. It was simple and graceful and just perfect. Caleb wore his best suit and looked at her like she was the only soul on earth. When the preacher asked if he took Elena to be his wife, Caleb said, "I do with my whole heart, for as long as we both shall live." When he asked if she took Caleb to be her husband, Elena said, "I do, with my eyes wide open to all his flaws because I love him anyway. The whole church chuckled at that. Mrs. Hartwell cried. James stood up as the best man and gave a speech about stubborn brothers and the brave women who love them. They danced in the church hall right after, to the same waltz they had practiced so many times in the library. But this time, every step was pure happiness, instead of a careful performance. Happy? Caleb whispered as they swayed to the music. Terrified, Elena admitted, but yes, happy. You too. Terrified and happy and so in love with you that I can hardly draw a breath. He kissed her on the temple. Thank you for not giving up on me, for coming back when I was too hard-headed to come get you. Thank you for finally believing you were worth fighting for, Elena answered. They built their life together from that day on, not a perfect life, but an honest one. Caleb still had days when the old fear would sneak back in, when he would catch himself putting up walls from old habit. But Elena would call him on it, gentle but firm, and he would get to work tearing them down again. Elena still had moments of doubt, wondering if she truly belonged in this life, if she was enough. But Caleb would just hold her close and remind her of all the ways she had changed him, saved him, and made him believe in a second chance. They turned the ranch into something brand new. It was still about cattle and managing the land, but there was also a seamstress shop in town where Elena taught other women her skills. She hired girls, just like she used to be, desperate and full of talent and just needing a chance, and she gave them the very opportunity she had once needed so badly. 3 years after that first wedding, Elena was sitting in the library where they had once practiced dancing, and she told Caleb she was pregnant. He cried, with actual tears running down his face, and he thanked her for giving him everything he ever thought he would never deserve. Their daughter was born in the spring, tiny and perfect, with her daddy's dark eyes. They named her Adelaide Catherine, to honor the woman who had believed in them both, and to reclaim a name that had once been tied to so much pain. Caleb held his daughter and understood for the very first time what his mother had tried to tell him all those years ago. That love is not about being perfect or without fear. It is about showing up day after day and choosing to let yourself be vulnerable anyway. She is perfect, he whispered. She is going to be every bit as stubborn as you are, Elena said, worn out but glowing with happiness. Heaven help us, Caleb said, but he was smiling. 5 years turned into 10. Adelaide got little sisters, 2 more daughters, and then finally a son who looked just like his Uncle James. The ranch did well, and Morrison disappeared from politics in disgrace. And the story of how Caleb and Elena Hartwell fell in love became the kind of legend people told at other weddings. It was proof that sometimes the very best love stories start with terrible plans, but end with terrible courage. On their 10th anniversary, Caleb took Elena back to that same spot on the porch where he had kissed her in the rain, where she had told him she loved him, and he had been too afraid to believe it. "Do you remember this place?" he asked. "How could I ever forget? This is where you finally stopped being a stubborn fool." Elena smiled, leaning into his arms. "I was a spectacular fool," Caleb agreed. "But you loved me anyway. I loved you because you were worth it. You just needed to believe that for yourself." Caleb pulled out a folded piece of paper, yellowed with age now, and creased from being handled over the years. It was their original contract, the one Elena had used to save them from all of Morrison's schemes. "I kept this," he said. "After everything, I just could not bring myself to get rid of it. It felt important somehow." Elena took it from him, reading through the terms they had agreed to so long ago. $5,000, a shop in Denver. No romantic feelings, just business. She laughed, a sound full of memories and love. "We broke every single rule in this contract," she said. "We honored the ones that mattered," Caleb corrected her. "I did pay off your debts. And I did give you a shop just a little closer to home than Denver. And you got your freedom at the end of the year. Freedom to choose to stay instead of being forced to. That was the most important part." Elena ran her finger over the line about no romantic feelings. The most important rule was a lie from the start. Caleb said, "I think I was already falling in love with you when we wrote this thing." That rule was not there to stop feelings. It was there to protect me from having to admit that I had them. Elena handed the contract back to him. "What should we do with it?" Caleb looked down at the paper that had started it all. The bargain that had turned into real love. The lie that had become their truest truth. Then he walked over to the edge of the porch and tore it into little pieces, letting the wind catch them and scatter them across the ranch lands. "We do not need it anymore," he said. "We never really did." That contract was just an excuse for two people, scared half to death, to finally let their guard down with each other. "It was the best excuse I ever made," Elena said, "and the best deal I ever shook on." Caleb pulled her in close, his arms feeling strong and sure around her. "That piece of paper is not what saved us," he said. "It was you, refusing to let me hide behind rules and my own foolish fear. It was you, choosing to fight for us when I was too spooked to fight for myself. You came back for me when I sure as heck did not deserve it. You absolutely did deserve it," Elena said, her voice firm. "You have always deserved to be loved, Caleb. You just needed somebody stubborn enough to keep on proving it until you finally believed it." "I believe it now," he said. "It took me a long while, but I finally believe that I am worth loving, that we are worth fighting for. That happiness is not something I have to go out and earn. It is something I am allowed to have when someone offers it with an open heart." They stood there together as the sun went down over those Wyoming plains, painting the whole sky in shades of gold and rose. Inside the house, they could hear their children laughing. Mrs. Hartwell was probably in there, cooking up some kind of fun. And life was messy and complicated and just absolutely perfect. "I love you," Caleb said, and the words came easy now after all these years of practice. "I love you too," Elena answered, "even when you are being a stubborn mule." "Especially when I am being stubborn," Caleb corrected her, and he kissed her just as the last bit of light faded from the sky. That bargain had been made a decade ago, born from desperation and fear. But what grew from that unlikely seed was something neither of them could have ever guessed. It was a love built on pure honesty, made stronger by choice, and kept alive by the daily decision to be brave enough to be open with one another. It was not the perfect love story. It was a whole lot better than perfect. It was real, and in the end, that was all either one of them had ever really wanted. Someone to be real with, someone who saw all the chipped and broken pieces and made the choice to stay anyway. Someone who understood that love was not about dodging pain, but about having a partner to face it with, side by side. Caleb Hartwell had spent most of his life believing he was impossible to love. He figured that vulnerability was just a weakness, that building walls to keep out the hurt was the same thing as protecting himself from life itself. Elena Cross had spent her years thinking she had to earn her spot in this world, that her worth was tied to what she could do for others. She thought love was a prize other people got to have while she just tried to get by. But together they had learned that love was not some kind of business deal or a show you put on. It was not something you had to be perfect enough to earn. Love was a choice you made every single day, through the fear and the joy and everything that came in between. It was a choice to show up, to be honest, and to trust that letting someone see you, all of you, was worth the risk of getting hurt. They made that choice once in a moment of pure desperation, promising to pretend for 1 year. They had made it again every day since then, choosing to love for real instead of playing it safe. And they would keep on making that choice for all the years still to come. Not because some contract said they had to, but because they had finally learned that the best things in life do not come with strings attached, without a rule book, or without the safety net of knowing exactly how it will all turn out. The best things come from being brave enough to love without any guarantees, from taking a chance on a deal that seems impossible and making it real, from understanding that sometimes the story you tell the world becomes the truest thing you have ever known. That right there was their story. Messy, tangled up, beautiful, and the absolute complete truth. And it was only just beginning. This content was carefully researched, developed, and manually edited by our team to deliver meaningful stories with valuable life lessons. Every narrative is crafted to entertain, inspire, and empower our audience. We believe that great stories can change lives, and we are committed to bringing you content that matters. Thank you for being part of our community.